How are you?
I think it's just Natalie.
I pandemic. Yeah. A lot of things. I was talking to an electrician who told me the wiring that they did for material costs a year and a half ago was $40,000. By fours that was $2.
Krista invited me to Variable Drive. I somehow made like a temporary visitor thing with my work.
Did I invite you?
So you did, but I can't get to it. My computer side.
Can't get PVC conduit. Can't get it.
Probably gonna be a lot of refurbishing and stuff, but that's
You have to mute.
All right, there we go.
Krista, you have to let me in.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
No.
I'm trying to do like,
You're trying to do 6 things at once. Okay, whatever for you.
Only 6, Christie?
Just like your day job.
you have to mute. Oh God, no.
Recording in progress.
It's nice, but I wonder now staring at the screen.
No, I think the thing is that you, what's muted?
Do you mute, turn on your speaker?
Turn your volume down.
your mic is moving, but yeah,
Turn the volume on.
yeah, there's like a switch to turn it off. completely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why am I still waiting?
Who are you? I don't know you're in.
No, I do this.
Do this temporarily because I can't see. I'm staring at the screen.
Yes. Listen to you. She said, "Your numbers." So that was the belief that we came to today.
Finally.
I mean, they were clarifying the thing. So that's the problem. For all we know, there's 15,000. We don't know. We don't know. So the problem is, I mean, the resolution, I think, is so the way it is, but whatever plan they come up with has to be appended. Well, I can't find file. Can we at least make a statement that I just I don't know. We can do that, yeah, definitely, definitely.
Something's gonna be said about that, 'cause those are not right.
They're not, but we don't know what they are.
But I
That's
don't
why,
wanna-
that's why I said.
They don't mark it in, so I didn't work.
Because you're trying to get logged in.
That's why I got here early. Didn't bribe my kids to come set it up.
Every piece of business.
This is
What is this? What is this?
I
can look to it. You're there instead of here.
My computer's already
I
going.
don't know what's going on.
All right.
You're getting your steps in today, Kristen?
Yeah. The copier is not working.
Good, I mean, I can see that on my phone popping around over there on my computer. Yeah, I can't get out of here. Yeah, there's in
Yep.
Yeah.
This is my first one. Yeah. Tim, is actually right now.
Doing your thing. So.
You stare yourself on the
I
screen.
know. You know, I'm like, I like this really late driving glasses in my car.
Before we approve the agenda.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't know he was starting today, so. We can do it before, after I do the, after we do the opening stuff, and if you want to swear him in. Yes, I'm ready.
Good evening. I'd like to call the East Hamilton Township Planning Board meeting on June 9th to order. Please stand for flag salute. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In compliance with the Open Public Meeting Act, this is a regularly scheduled meeting pursuant to the annual meeting notice as published in the January 21st, 2021 issue of the Hunterdon County Democrat. A copy of the agenda was forwarded to the Hunterdon County Democrat, filed in the Township Clerk's office, and posted on the bulletin board and Township website on June 3rd, 2020. Mark Castellano.
Here.
Gregory Siakio.
Here.
Mike Mills.
Here.
Natalie Nelson.
Here.
Jackson Ryder.
Here.
John Serena, Tamara Lee.
Here.
Marnie Stetson.
Here.
Rick Wolf.
Here.
Tim Willie.
Here.
Elena Gable.
Here.
Bill Burr.
Here.
And Yolanta Maziar.
Oh,
Review the agenda.
We're gonna swear in
Swear in Greg.
Greg. I don't, sorry. I didn't know he was starting.
That's still mine. That changes.
Okay. You can please raise your right hand. I'm sorry. I, and
I-
please state your name,
Gregory Giacchio,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and that I will bear true faith
and I will bear true faith
and allegiance to the same
and allegiance to the same
and to the governments
and the governments
established in the United States
established in the United States
and in this state,
and in this state
under the authority of the people,
under the authority of the people,
I further solemnly swear
I further solemnly swear
that I will faithfully,
that I will faithfully,
impartially,
impartially,
and justly
and justly
perform all the duties
perform all the duties
of the office
of the office of
planning board member
planning board member
of the Township of East Amwell,
of the Township of East Amwell,
according to the best of my ability,
according to the best of my ability,
so help you God.
so help me God.
Congratulations.
That's all for agenda review, Krista.
Yes.
Excuse me, can I get a motion to open to the public for items not on tonight's agenda, please?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody in the audience have anything to say about anything that's not on the agenda tonight? Francis, please come forward. You know the routine?
Yeah, two times.
Francis Gadigan, 123 North Hill Road, Orleans, New Jersey, former member of this board. Long-term member of the public and bird dog. There are some tasks and assignments that the county has funded that are the responsibility of the planning board to do for the village that have not been acted on, along with other things, when there's been a whole lot of huff and puff and hula about distractions. And I'd like to know when you're gonna get around to doing the study that the county gave you money for as to what can be done with the viability of the village. I also think that there are some process and content gaps. I spent the last couple days in the construction office over at West Amwell going through files and detail, and to say that some things were spotty is an understatement. And I think that there needs to be some improved quality here. Last month's meeting, I think, was misidentified as to the block in the lot and things like that. For that, there was the solar installation on Linvale Road that had some issues with proper noticing and things like that, that open us up to litigation should things not go the way of someone, and also opening us up to things being done and us not knowing about it, and it being, oops, it got built and you're stuck. I would hope that the planning board, Tim, this is no criticism of you. You've been above and beyond, but it's not working well. It's certainly not working accurately, and it's not working in the best interest of the whole township and of the individuals who come before this board, either for planning or variance or looking for relief. It's been over a year, I believe, since the gentleman down on Old York Road asked for relief from the setbacks so he could put a garage or a pool and the others, and the whole village is being left hanging, plus the Ringo's advisory group. They need their input, they need your expertise, so when are you gonna give it?
It's going to be discussed tonight, Francis. We're gonna be going over Elena's proposals, and one of those proposals is just that, to spend the money that the grant entitled us to do the study for the highway and the Ringos. It'll be discussed.
Okay.
We'll be evaluating the proposal tonight from Elena's company.
Yeah, and a simple point of fact that I was asked, oh, is there an agenda? There's no agenda.
There's no agenda because our copier is not working.
Or the Zoom doesn't work, or there are more errors. You must have a gremlin. Sage the building, do something. Things don't get that much. And I know when my copier hasn't worked, I've driven the 5 miles down the road to Staples and made copies.
Duly noted, Francis.
Yeah. Get it together.
Anybody else from the public? Can I get a motion to close to the public, please?
So move.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Can I get a second?
Who motion? Can you speak up?
Yes, sorry.
Thanks. Who second?
Any corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Anybody who was not here last month? You here? You weren't here.
And Greg wasn't.
Yes.
We have the resolution for approval. And I know Pam had an email that she sent out with something. You want to speak on that?
Yeah, the second whereas clause, I just think we ought to clarify that total square footage. It was later discussed in testimony that was not an accurate number in the way it's written right now. I understand that's the number that was on the application, but if we could just reword that whereas to clarify that that was the number on the application, but we really don't know what the impervious cover is, and that's going to be determined. I mean, I think the conclusions are correct. We said somewhere between 8 and 1,000 square feet less would be created after the development. But I just want that second whereas reworded to clarify that.
Yes, I did have a sentence in the testimony to the effect that during discussion with the board, it became evident that the existing amount of lot coverage listed in the application may have been overstated. You know, the problem with simply saying that isn't the number or putting in a number is we don't know what the number is at this point. So I can go by what the application says, which is that 11,000. And I can say, you know, approximately 11,000. But I think instead of changing the second whereas, I would suggest that we change the board's findings. That's page 2. Under the last whereas of that page, number 1. I think we should add a sentence to that first paragraph to indicate that the applicant claimed that the square footage is 7,600, but that is also an approximation, that the number that was given in the application was overstated, and that the board is conditioning this approval upon an investigation and a determination of you know, what the actual square footage is. And then later in the conditions, I talk about it again. So when they submit the final plan, they are going to submit with the final actual numbers after they have deducted the 800 to 1,000 square feet. So if that's acceptable to the board, then I'll add that sentence. I'll, you know, I'll reword it a little bit more articulately. That's pretty much the gist of it.
I'm fine with that.
Krista, you're good with that, everything?
Mm-hmm.
So as that being said, can I get a motion to approve the resolution?
So move.
Second?
I'll second.
Roll call.
Mark Castellano,
Yes.
Tamara Lee,
Yes.
Mike Mills.
Yes.
Natalie Nelson,
Yes.
Marnie Stetson,
Yes.
Rick Wolf,
Yes.
and Tim Willie.
Yes. Next up, new business, John and Maris Hance, block variance, lot coverage and side and rear yard setback, 8 Manners Road, block 23, lot 13.01. Come on up and have a seat, folks.
Before you get started, if you are, will you both be testifying?
Probably not.
Okay, so whoever will be testifying, please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give with regard to this application will be the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your presentation, you need to move the microphone a little closer.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, well, I'm not exactly sure how these things work, so if I'm to just begin, I will.
Yeah, no, go ahead, just, you're
Okay, thank
gonna
you.
tell us what we've all
Well-
seen the application, but just in your own words, explain what's going on and, we'll go from there.
Well, basically,
And before you go on, if you could please state your name for the record and give us your property address, just for the record.
Sure, certainly. Maris Hans, my husband John Hans, our address is 8 Manners Road. The block is 23, the lot is 1301.
Thank you.
Okay, so we come before you this evening to request variance on the side and rear lot property lines for our storage shed or storage barn that we're attempting to have erected. Our application requests 5 feet from the back and 5 feet from the side, due to the fact that the greater amount of our backyard is now a septic leach field. So we really can't build upon that area, and if we were to follow the existing ordinances, the structure would wind up pretty much in the back of our usable yard, right in the middle. And so this is why we're requesting this.
So we don't have, Kristen, the impervious coverage has changed, so we're not,
That is correct.
so they're under the impervious.
That is
okay.
correct.
So it's just a side yard setback, side and rear yard setback, correct?
Okay. I did prepare some notes in regard to the questions and comments that were given from both HDA and Colliers Engineering and Design. I have provided Krista with a copy of those notes. They're about 3 pages long. There are a lot of similarities in the questions and the comments. As you can see, I'm extremely nervous because I don't do public speaking very often. So
I didn't before this either, so.
So, because my face isn't too red. Excuse me. However, if you would like to ask me a direct question regarding these comments, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Maris, I didn't provide them with it because you were going to update with the lighting,
Okay.
and I didn't send it because I didn't get it. So
Okay, not a
my
problem.
apologies.
So when I provided these notes to Krista this morning, she recommended that I mention something about the lighting that is proposed on the storage shed. On the plans for the storage shed, there is a proposed light over the single walk-through door and another proposed light over the overhead where the tractor, the lawnmower would be, driven in. We have no plans at this time to have the lighting installed. We will not be installing plumbing. We will not be installing a run electric route. At some point in the future, we thought we might put up a little solar panel just for, a small battery pack to power those lights. And those lights would not be on a timer. They would eventually, whenever we did power them, they would eventually just be a switch if we had to go out there at night. At this point, Krista mentioned that I ought to provide testimony that we would be following any lighting ordinance that is in effect, and she did send me a copy. I read through it. I do realize that it has to be, downward lighting, nothing, non-opaque, just specifically, for safety if you're walking into the building at night. So at this point, we don't have any plans to install, but probably 6 months, 8 months down the road, we would like to put a little solar lighting up there, for that matter. One of the questions that was asked regarding the placement of this shed was there any other location that would be suitable to us? And we don't find that there is, based on the fact that, again, we had to install a new septic system about 1.5 years ago, almost 2 years ago, that really did take over the bulk of the underground usage in the backyard. So it looks very nice, you know, it's nice and flat now, but you can't do anything on it, you know, it's quite large. And of course, we wouldn't be interested in putting it in front of the house because who would do that? And the third location would be the side of the house, but that's where the 2 tanks are for the septic system, so there isn't any other spot. There were some questions on the overhang of the storage unit, storage building, pole barn. I tend to call it a storage unit just because what we're going to do with it is really put our landscaping, residential landscaping equipment in there. The outdoor furniture from the summer, some recreational items. But the overhang lean-to portion would be facing into the interior of the yard. So the building will be long this way, you know, rather than this way. And so it would be really aesthetically pleasing in that fact, because even just next door is the same looking type of structure. It's wooden, it's quite old, but it's red, black roof, white trim. It's, you know, perfectly suitable for the area. We have the farm behind us. They also have lean-to type horse sheds in their area. So it really does blend in. The difference is that ours would be steel. Theirs are wood. We did that as a cost saving measure. The wooden ones are, you know, quite a bit, 2 or 3 times more expensive. And the steel will last longer with quite a lot less maintenance involved. But we think it'll be very attractive, and it will really be very congruous with the area. Let's see what else. Well, there's a simple fact that we've lived there since 1997, and I've never been able to park in my garage. I'm not going to say anything more about that, but there's a really great possibility that if our variance request is approved, I might be able to not have to shovel snow off my car this year coming up. I might be able to park in the garage, which would be pretty awesome. So that would be super. Another question was raised regarding the existing landscaping. We do not plan to remove, or do we need to remove any trees? We do not need to clear any existing vegetation. The only thing that we will need to do is some simple slope grading, you know, to have the structure flat, right? And the other question was regarding the direction of the runoff. So we also, because of the septic system design, we now have a natural, and well, designed by now natural runoff slope on the rear of the property, which the storage unit would be sitting exactly in that direction. So no additional changes to the back of the property would be needed, because the runoff will just simply, you know, go along with the same lines that it does currently. Let's see what else. And so, yes, we also mentioned that the assumed colors noted were correct with the red, the white trim, and the black roof. There will be no additional paving or driveway expansion to, you know, get to the unit, because it's just not necessary. And again, it's a storage unit for landscaping, personal residential landscaping equipment, things of that nature. And we have a patio, so the outdoor furniture to be stored there in the winter. And I think that may be it, but yeah, based on the questions, the positive criteria, again, I cited the hardship of location. the negative criteria, there wouldn't seem to be any. Again, the unit really does blend into the landscape. The neighbors have the same type of units. Okay, I'm not gonna pass it out. And well, I'll stop talking if
That's it.
anybody wants to speak.
Let it
I'm
go.
done.
Let it go.
Okay, so that's it. If anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
And it might be that I was not reading this correctly. It says that the height is 10 feet 4 inches. But that's just to the ceiling, not to the top of the roof, right?
Just to the-
What is that?
Just to see them.
Just to the ceiling. And so do you know how high to the top of the roof?
Actually, we do. I have plans. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's 12 feet 11 inches.
Total.
That's what it's saying on the print here, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. I just didn't see it.
12 feet.
We're good. Okay. He was able to find it. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions on the board? Natalie?
No, she said no.
Can I get a motion to open to the public, please?
So,
Second,
I'll second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody in the public have
Frida?
comments,
Yes.
please?
Rita Rapp, 1 Lindell Road. Just one quick question because I did not take time to read the application. And I'm gathering by the 5-foot requirement that it's a very small lot, pre-existing because she's lived there for a long, long time. What size is the lot?
It's almost 2 acres.
It's just under 2 acres.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Francis?
I'll be brief if you want, I can develop.
Brief.
Started out calling lots. Hi, I'm in support of this application. The only thing I'd like to point out is.
Francis, just for the record, please.
Francis Gaffigan, 123 Wardsville Road, Ringgoes, New Jersey. That, what is this? The 10th, 15th, 20th setback application that people have been forced to go through and spend money on. And it from what I recall of the zoning law is that when you have a lot of variances, it's a signal that there's something that needs to be fixed in your code. And you have enough applications going back a couple of years, as well as people coming forward to tell you that you need to address your setbacks. They're in the Valley District. So they're one of the little orphan lots that got hurt in the down zoning and a bunch of others. So it's a problem. It's been a problem for 20 plus years. More than I said plus. Fix it. So my curiosity, and I can find out another time, is that how many thousands of dollars have these people spent and their residents? It's not right. Fix it.
We're working on that, Francis.
I know you are too.
Anybody else from the public? Can I get a motion to close, please?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any more questions or comments from the board? There's no one here to complain about it, so I really don't think I'm in favor of.
Yeah, I don't see any problems with it. I don't see any detriment.
I think that's right into to everybody's yard around you, the pastures in the back and the neighbors to the side. I mean, anybody who was out there to the site visit can see that it's, I mean, you got a driveway right there. I mean, the driveway's only 3 foot off your fence, so they're gonna drive by your barn, but I don't,
That's the access road to the pond behind us.
Yeah, so.
Have you discussed this with your neighbors?
Just send letters out.
Absolutely. Mhm. Well, and also we're friendly with them, so we talked about it.
Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Roll call.
And before the roll call, and I apologize if this has already been addressed, but I was fighting with my iPhone. I couldn't hear, but was there something about the applicant complying with township lighting standards?
Yeah, the testimony was there will be no lighting at this time.
Okay,
But when they do put lighting in, it's going to probably be solar and they intend to comply with lighting standards.
Very good. So would the board like to add that as a condition to this approval?
Yeah.
Is that,
Sounds
okay,
reasonable.
okay, very good. Thank you, Ayla.
Okay.
Roll call.
Mark Castellano,
Yes.
I'm sorry. Tamara Lee,
Yes.
Mike Mills.
Yes.
Marnie Stetson,
Yes.
Natalie Nelson,
Yes.
Rick Wolf,
Yes.
Tim Willie,
Yes.
and Jackson Ryder.
Yes. Okay, folks, so next month, we'll have the resolution written up, and then you can move forward with your permit process.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Good luck with it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have fun emptying that garage.
Right on to it, Tim.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's why my wife won't let me build one, because she knows I'll fill it up.
Have a good night.
Good night, folks. Moving on to new business. Krista?
Yes, GAW Holdings application, we just officially withdrew. The application.
Can you just write which one is that?
That's the post office.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's easier if I just say post office application.
With a little luck, we'll have the on-street parking restored soon. And JDOT, the engineer, has signed off on removing the bike lane and restoring the on-street parking. It's just now we're in the queue to actually get the work done. So hopefully that will ease significantly the parking situation at the post office.
I guess everybody saw the email that Jason Silverthorne has resigned from the planning board. He's a baseball coach, and now COVID is relieving everybody's restrictions. He is very busy, so they're going to be minus Jason, and I don't know where that goes from. You know,
Well, he's a class two member,
Yeah.
and that's an employee of the municipality. So we'll have to think about
We're
how
not
we might
official.
want to fill that. Yes,
But that's on you guys, correct?
correct.
That's good with me. That's good with me. Okay, unfinished business. Mr. Gallagher.
Mr. Chairman, I have to recuse myself
Oh, yes,
for this one, so I will step down.
So Krista, how many do we have for this application?
8 members.
Members that are voting who either at the last hearing or listened to or watched the video.
Did you watch the video from last month?
The last month's planning board video, I did.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
6, Natalie is 7.
7.
So, yes.
Yeah, 7. Mhm.
Sure.
Can we have the professional staff do the thing, and then we can open it up to everybody instead of individual? Like we did last.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Let's speed it along.
Yeah. Okay.
Gentlemen, you're still under oath, as I'm being told by our attorney.
Mr. Gallagher, you understand you're still under oath?
Yes.
Thank you. And you acknowledge that you are?
Yes.
Thank you.
And we have the engineer, Charlie, he was sworn, he was on Zoom last time.
You were on Zoom last time.
And the
Yeah.
planner is
He
on
was
Zoom.
sworn.
You switched up.
I'm glad to be here in person.
Planner is still on Zoom,
Okay, very good.
but he finished his testimony, he's just here in the event anything comes up. Really having a simple presentation today, as I just mentioned, our planner completed his testimony. And when you see, we submitted new plans, although we didn't give you a whole lot of time to look at them. So the engineer is here to explain that we reduced the size of the enclosed space on the accessory building from 3,500 square feet to 2,000 square feet to bring it into compliance, eliminating a variance. And Mr. Gallagher's here in the event there are any further questions about the use, but he essentially finished his testimony last time as well. So without further ado, everybody can turn early, I hope. Charles Shalati, our engineer.
It's right if I walk over to the board.
Absolutely.
I think this is exhibit 3 or 4.
Not sure where we are, Krista. We have 2 left.
We're on 3.
3.
Mhm.
I thought we were on 4. Let me-
Are we?
Let me just look at my.
I'm sorry, we are on 4,
Yes.
because, yeah, we're on 4.
It's 8-4.
Just, let me interrupt. Did I send you everything that you needed?
Yes, you did.
Okay. 'Cause I only sent 2, so
Yeah, but we had,
you had the other one, I
Yes.
thought, okay.
From the last application, the building is in the same location. And what this plan basically depicts is the smaller building, so the enclosed area, and hopefully everybody can see this, and I try to get it so people can see behind in the audience. But the enclosed area of the building is about 2,000 square feet, and then the proposed open patio area, porch area covered is about 720 square feet. We did some grading around the site to confirm the building height. At the most conservative spot, which will be this front corner right here, the building is 19.81 feet high. It is slightly less on the back corner due to the grading. There are a couple of changes to the plan that we've added based on the comments from the board last month. Mr. Gallagher has agreed to add 10 trees, which I think were discussed at the meeting. We've shown the locations. We have not picked the species yet. I think there's maybe some additional testimony about an agreement to have someone manage the property for woodlands. And if there is, we would, defer to their recommendations on what tree species to put back in consultation with their engineer. The other item that was added is the building has 8 downspouts. There's basically 4 on each side of the building. It's a standard A roof, so half the roof goes to one side, half goes to the other. We propose to put rain barrels at each of those downspout locations to be able to collect the rainwater for gardening, watering, things like that. So it'll reduce the runoff from the proposed building, which has been reduced to 2,720 square feet.
Including the cover.
Including the cover. Yeah, over
2,000.
Closing 2,000, but overall the roof area is 2,720. And we've done some basic calculations, which will be submitted to your engineer for the New Jersey DEP water quality storm to make sure that those rain barrels will handle that water quality storm, which they will. And we can provide additional reports or the HydroCAD model or if Mr. Burr would like to see that.
Craig can fill you in on the plans for the tree planting.
So I've contracted Heartland Ecological to come out and do a full study for land management. It's in the process. The application's in. I'm working with them to have them come out and thoroughly assess what exactly is going on with the woods. Aside from the fact that, again, we have leaf scorch, ash borer, we have all that other stuff going on. So I fix air conditioners for a living. I'm not a tree person. So subsequently, I'm retaining a tree person to tell me what I should do. But again, the true intent is to not leave this massive boot print on the land. I would have never moved to the mountains if I didn't like trees. And that's really where I'm at with it. So, I understand, we didn't include it in the last plan, but the plan was to plant some additional trees, especially across that front side of there. So there would be, if there was any issue with any of the neighbors which do face that lot, which we don't have, I've talked to all of those neighbors, we don't have an issue there. There would be an additional tree buffer there as well, so that, like I said, not my business shouldn't be everybody else's business. I agree with that.
As the building is currently placed, and just to refresh the board, it's about 500 feet from the property owner's line and about 850 feet from the road?
Yes.
Something like that? Thank you.
So,
So you're going to be relying on their recommendations for the species and that's going to go on there. Amongst the rest of the property, you're having problems with your driveway trees.
Yep.
That really concludes the presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Bill, do you have any questions?
Just before we move on, just for housekeeping, I'm sorry, what are we calling that exhibit A4? What is it called? I just, for the record,
For the record, it is called the exhibit plan EP1,
thank you.
and that's dated today, 6/9/2021.
Bill, do you have any?
I have a couple of questions, maybe just more so clarifications, but when I take a look at the new plan you submitted versus the previous plan, it looks like the proposed lot coverage number has gone up. And I'm not sure why that is, because we made the, or you made the building smaller.
The building itself is smaller, but we had to add to get to the driveway. There's a small area of driveway increase on both sides with some concrete curbing to be able to grade up to that. Because we wanted to be able to drive right in from
Okay.
here. And with the grade differential here, this isn't a hugely steep lot, but there's enough grading issues here with the general slope this way that we didn't want to lower the building anymore and have a lot of water rushing in towards it from
Okay.
anywhere else. So we wanted to get it up a little bit higher, direct the water around this way, direct the water around this way. To do that, though, we had to add a little bit of pavement to that existing driveway that goes to the building right now.
And that's new pavement that was not previously proposed?
It's about 88 square feet.
Okay.
And it will match existing pavement,
Correct,
and we still don't exceed impervious.
correct. It's still below impervious coverage.
And the existing driveway, is it gravel or paved now?
It's paved.
It is paved all the way up. Okay.
Yes, all the way from the street.
You had mentioned that you're proposing now, I think, 8 rain barrels to capture roof runoff for the water quality storm.
Yes.
Recognizing that that's not a tremendously large storm, what happens when those rain barrels overtop? Where does that water run off
We
to?
will have a detail for that. It'll be, each of the rain barrel locations are at the downspouts. So that water will follow the natural grading. The overflow for those rain barrels will be in accordance with the new BMP manual. So there'll be an overflow on top and then there'll be a way to drain out to the bottom.
Okay. And the applicant is proposing to use the water from those barrels for gardening or?
Gardening, watering, whatever else you can use it for.
Okay.
I'm thinking you want to use it for animals, but I don't use it for water.
Okay.
Depends on how long it takes.
They drink out of bubbles.
Okay. And let me just ask you another question on the landscaping. The 10 trees that are being proposed that you don't have a species or a size picked out yet, is that to compensate for the trees that were previously removed? I think you'd sent through an invoice from a tree removal company. Is that to compensate for those, or is it to provide additional buffer screening to the neighboring properties?
It was in response
What's the goal of
It was
that?
in response to board concern about having taken trees down.
Okay.
They were taken down out of necessity, but in response to that, we put some trees and has taken it a step farther by engaging someone to come out and take a look at the whole property.
And have they
Work with the township.
have they given you any initial feedback for what would be good species? I just think it would be helpful for the board to have an idea of what you're proposing and how big they are. That's all.
Their average timeline, their average timeline to get their full report done and get a site survey, since they're extremely backlogged, they're talking about potentially this fall. So that's when they would be able to come out and see what that is. So, I mean, at this point, delays and everything else in the building and consumables, frankly, in the industry, there's massive delays in steel and commodities. The timelines look to be that they're gonna align around the same time that we would be looking, once the building is built, to physically put those trees in, that we could have that study done. So I'm not gonna put an invasive species tree on the mountain.
Right.
I'm not planting bamboo everywhere.
Would you agree to a condition if the application is approved to comply with the town's ordinance as far as what the landscape requirements are? As far as, non-invasive species, sizes of trees?
Yes.
Okay.
General requirements. Are
Of course. Yes. Yes.
Is there a tree person who oversees that? In other words, I'm leaning towards, as a condition of approval, if we're going to agree to that, that he has somebody that he can go to rather than like an entire committee or
It would,
coming back to the planning board to
right.
talk about 10 trees, you know, is there someone?
It would typically
on staff,
be
like
one of the
Kristen,
landscape architects from my firm or Elena's firm.
The condition would be to the
To the satisfaction
satisfaction
of
of the board engineer. That's what I
there.
would do.
Perfect.
So we're talking about complying with township requirements regarding replacement trees or about the tree 10?
The type of trees, type and size.
Type and size.
Type and
for-
Yeah.
Type
size.
and size for those 10 trees that are being proposed by the
Right.
applicant.
Right.
And planting details and stakes
Yeah.
and anything else that's needed.
I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but back to the runoff issue. If the rain barrels overflow, where does that runoff flow to? And what impacts will it have, if any? I just want to be clear,
From the impact standpoint,
right?
it is following the proposed grading contours. So if you look, and this is kind of on this plan here, and these are the different roof areas. So if, you know, this barrel overflows versus this barrel, but generally, you know, this roof here is going to flow. If it's coming from here, it'll follow the grading contours and follow the runoff as it goes to that. Same thing on the backside. What we've done is we've created a little swale on the backside. So if these overflow, you know, this one here will follow this side. This will come down through this swale and flow over across the driveway into the woods. So
And
we
then-
don't envision any impacts to the surrounding properties or even to this property.
Just quickly summarize for the board, what is downstream of the property or downhill of the property? Are there any residences following the contours downhill?
Eventually, yes, but by the time they would get down to that point, it's over 500 plus feet.
Okay.
Down there.
Okay.
More, and that's right.
Yeah, I guess that would be- get that.
Okay.
Probably quite a bit more.
But yeah, I think you run into the driveway for the, if you're going down that,
I run-
if you're going down the hill, you're gonna run into the driveway to the boys' home.
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
girls' home, whatever it is now.
496 feet from this corner to the property
Can I ask a question?
of wood, you know, woodland area.
Right, okay.
Let me ask you, if you don't mind, a question of the two engineers. If it makes more sense, if you wanted to add another condition that you and Charlie talked about, possibly reorienting the building in order for the grading to work better or the runoff to work better. I mean, the size wouldn't change. I don't know if that would make a difference. I'm not sure how the grading is on a property, but if that made sense, if you have a great concern, we wouldn't have a problem with you working with Charlie to
I'm less,
finesse the location.
I'm less concerned with the grading scheme
Yeah.
around the actual building.
Okay.
I'm more concerned in making sure that nobody downstream is going to be
Oh, okay.
negatively
I-
impacted. And that's,
I-
Atten-
it
yeah,
seems to me that, you
the
know,
land management ordinance
Okay,
has a clause that we ensure that
Sure.
doesn't happen, recognizing that this is not a major development. So you do not have intensive stormwater requirements to adhere to, but we still want to make sure that there aren't going to be any negative impacts.
so a little tiny picture, but you can see that there's very little from.
Understood.
location
And that
to
area,
house
as I understand, is
right. And it
mostly
does
wooded.
Slope gently, I guess, in that direction.
Right, and there's no structures that would be
Right.
downstream of that.
And in fact, Tim, you're up in there in that area. So right before that driveway for that boys' home, there's actually a little tiny stream that everything runs off into anyway, and then works its way down the mountain. So its final destination is probably
The bottom of the mountain.
the bottom of the mountain, really. There's nothing really in between there.
And nothing has changed with lighting, exterior lighting from what was previously proposed. You're going to adhere to comply with the building code requirements, but no spotlights. Everything's going to be down shielded.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, very good. Mr. Chairman, I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Elena, do you have that?
I do. I did get the revised drawings. I guess it was late yesterday. I did not have time to prepare a new planning review, but it's my understanding that you still require the variance for having an accessory building larger than 2,000 square feet. Because it's accessory buildings and structures. So even though the lean-to part isn't enclosed, it's still part of the overall footprint of the structure. So you would still need that variance to be, 720 feet over that. would you be willing to decrease the overall size to conform to the 2,000 square foot?
I will let our planner address that, but I can tell you that your ordinance does not define building, but in multiple places where they discuss measuring structures, they talk about enclosed space. And they accept out covered stoops, porches, and things like that, which are not enclosed. And that is the measurement of, that's the language from the ordinance, but I'll let Paul Greiger deal with it. Paul, are you there? Unmute your mic.
I am here. Good evening.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, my understanding and my read of the ordinance is the 2,000 square feet refers to the building area. I know there's a lot of different sections of the ordinance that maybe, it's not clear which one controls, but in my experience as a planner, typically, building areas within the walls, not exterior areas. And there are sections in the East Amwell ordinance which talk about excluding porches, for example, covered areas, terraces, that type of thing. So I think at the very least, the intent is met of a 2,000 square foot building. We have made significant change to reduce the size. So from my review of the ordinance, we would comply.
And Paul, are you familiar with the definition of gross floor area under the ordinance?
Yes, I am.
And that reads in relevant part, the gross floor area shall exclude ... open porch or patio areas.
Yes, amongst other things, that's correct. So
full floor area structure measured from the outside of the building.
Correct, meaning within anything that's outside of the walls of the building, despite being covered. And that's, yes, that's what we're basing the opinion on.
And the definition of a porch, which doesn't specifically apply here, but you can take from the language of the definition of a porch, which is a roof structure projecting from the front side or rear wall of a building. Again, building is not defined, having no enclosed features except the necessary columns to support the roof. That's the definition of a porch.
Correct.
If anything, the structure that sticks out from the front of this accessory structure would qualify as a porch.
Right.
Under your definition.
Right, but I would also, kind of imply that the habitable floor area and porches tend to be parts of a principal building and not an accessory building structure.
Your definition specifically excludes them from the principal structure.
Right. I do believe, again, the gross floor area is different than habitable. I think it applies to all types of buildings. I mean, that said, if for some reason the board disagrees with, our interpretation of the ordinance, our reading, I think the intent is still met at the very least. We're not providing, it's not a large covered area. It's a very small, appurtenance to the accessory building, which does not, result in greater massing of the building since there are no walls on it. Again, I think our reading of the ordinance is pretty clear on the floor area portion of it, but it's certainly the board's decision to make. We understand that. But from a planning point of view, my experience is typically within the walls.
Right. And additionally, within the Amwell Valley Agricultural District, which admittedly is not our district, there are footnotes that indicate when you're interpreting setbacks that patios, decks, fences may be located within the required building setbacks, and covered porches, decks shall be permitted within 10 feet of a building, correct?
Correct. I think the simplest answer is, again, there's a lot of different sections dealing with this. I can't, I can't claim to know which one is the controlling section, but there's a number of sections of the ordinance that seem to support, our interpretation of it.
Our position would be that we have eliminated the variance because we have an enclosed structure as an accessory building of 2,000 square feet or less, with what could be easily called a porch or an awning covering the entrance to the building. It's certainly contemplated by the interpretation given to various sections of your ordinance. Again, there's no specific definition of building. Everybody knows what a building is. A building is from the walls in, and it doesn't include stoops, steps, porches, and things like that typically. It wouldn't include a deck, even if it was a covered deck with an awning, under most ordinances. Having said that, our planner made the case at the last meeting for the granting of these variances, and those proofs still would apply if you decide to apply Ms. Gable's interpretation that covered unenclosed area as part of the accessory structure. So we're kind of arguing the alternative, but I believe that the enclosed building is 2,000 square feet or less.
Right, but I'm looking here at the definition of gross floor area.
Mhm.
And it says if residential uses the gross floor area shall exclude the areas of the garage, attic, open porch or patio, cellar, utility areas, heating and cooling rooms. So based upon that definition, it would seem as though the definition of gross floor area doesn't even apply to accessory structures, since accessory structures are capped at 2,000 square feet.
I was merely using that as an example of how your ordinance interprets something called gross floor area. If you were talking about gross floor area for an accessory structure, it would be the enclosed space, not the covered entryway, which only has support structures. If you're using it, you don't use it, your ordinance doesn't do that. Your ordinance doesn't specifically define the gross floor area or the size of an accessory structure. What I'm saying is that there are at least 3 areas of your ordinance that can be interpreted or stated or being used to show that your ordinance contemplates not counting covered areas that are not enclosed. That's all. I didn't say it was dispositive. And I think your reading of it is, if we're talking about gross floor area for an accessory structure, it wouldn't include an open porch or patio that only has support structures.
Right, but we're talking about the overall square footage of the
Right.
accessory building.
And I would ask you to point to me the specific section of the ordinance that defines the size of an accessory structure as including a covered open area. It can't, because it doesn't exist in the ordinance. I think what we're trying to do is apply common sense here. An enclosed building is an enclosed building, and the enclosed portion of this building is 2,000. That's what we're arguing. We can go back and forth all night.
Yeah,
Your
we can.
interpretation versus mine. We have put ours on the record, and the board is obviously going to vote on that. I think it's a common sense approach. Having said that, as well, I think we've more than justified the variance for a building if you decide to include the extra 720 square feet as requiring a variance. I don't think it does, but if it does, then I think Mr. Geigel more than justified that variance through his testimony at the last hearing.
Okay. I had another question, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but from last month's meeting, I had raised the question as to whether you were planning on selling any of your agricultural products or anything. Is there any
He
intent?
testified no,
Okay,
very clearly last time.
then that's
Yep.
fine. I just wanted to make sure because in order,
Well, and the testimony, just so we're abundantly clear, the testimony was that they're pets. They're there for his kids. His kids love them. They play with them. That's what they do with them. Save money on the lawnmower.
that's all the questions I have. Yes, thank you.
Does the board want to discuss, we want to open the public for?
I mean, I have some questions, and I can respond to the open the public, whatever you want to do.
Can I get a motion to open to the public, please?
So move.
Second? All in favor?
Is that you, Mike?
Anybody in the public, please come forward and state your name, address.
Hi, my name's Frida Ralph, One Window Road. I came all prepared for this, and I'm so happy to see that he has reduced the square footage. And I just have 2 questions. One is probably for him, and the other one is definitely for the engineer. And what is the total impervious coverage that you calculated?
Give me 1 second. I was gonna write a note. Assuming the technology works.
Sure, yeah.
I can pull out the plans.
We may actually have this. Now, we've calculated the maximum lot coverage in the existing was 16,904, the proposed is 19,371 square feet.
Okay, so that does slightly exceed the 3%. 3% of 12.71 acres, but not to the extent that the 3,500.
Well,
I calculated 45 point something other times 12.71, and then I when I came up to like 69 or something like that.
It's a very complicated way to calculate this. It's not just a straight percentage.
Yeah.
So it's 10,890 square feet plus 3% of excess over 5 acres.
Oh.
So we had 10,890 plus 10,075, which is 3% of 7.71 acres. And so we get a total allowance or permitted maximum lot coverage of 20,965.
Okay, that's fine. I didn't know that one in my head. The other question that I had is Kim or you, and that was, there was testimony about an old falling down building. Is that going away for the demolished as part of it? Okay. Already?
It's being replaced. This is being
Reason
replaced
for the building.
Being replaced by this one.
It's replaced by this, not added.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Francis?
Still Francis County and 123 Worthville Road, except for limitation. This application was approved September 14th, 2020, in the midst of a pandemic. Here we are, 9 months later, feeding the carcass of the dead horse that has diminished significantly a lot. When you start, it also underscores maybe some of the unrealistic expectations of what can be considered impervious and things like that in our ordinances that should be looked at. And I don't recall there being annual reports the last few years on the variances, but there's definitely anecdotal signal that, there are tweaks that should be done with the mountain ordinance and the valley ordinance in the village. But this man spent a lot of money. I went through every page of his notarized and signaled plan with a raised seal. Impeccable documentation I've never seen the like of. And very thorough, very professional, and just go forward and approve this thing. I don't want to see us with any more lawsuits. And I think that they have bent over backwards to accommodate the concerns and whatever, and they should be applauded. That's my take on it.
Thank you, Francis. Anybody else from the public? Is there anybody on Zoom?
Anybody on Zoom?
I almost forgot to ask that
Did
question.
too. You could just unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. Nope.
Can I get a motion to close to the public, please?
So
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Board, questions, comments?
I have some questions. I'm going to ask that you bear with me because I have to refer to a number of provisions. In our land use section of our East Amwell Code, there is a definition of accessory building structure or use. That's what this is. I don't think anyone will debate that this is an accessory building or structure. That definition says, and I'm going to read exactly, no accessory building structure or use as defined in this section shall be allowed over 2,000 square feet. So you can't have an accessory building structure or use that's more than 2,000 square feet. And that 2,000 square foot limitation is repeated throughout our ordinances. There's no ambiguity on the 2,000 square foot cap. The statement that was made earlier that our ordinances do not define building or structure is not a correct statement. Our ordinances do define building or structure. Section 92-4, terms defined, says the following words and phrases in this chapter are used as defined in the municipal land use law. And two of those words or phrases are building or structure. So our ordinance does in fact define a building and a structure, and it defines them by reference to the MLUL. And the MLUL defines, you're gonna have to just bear with me because I'm switching back and forth to a number of things. The MLUL defines building as, and I quote, a combination of materials to form a construction adapted to permanent, temporary, or continuous occupancy and having a roof. Doesn't say a structure that has 4 walls and a roof. It says a structure or a combination of materials, which we clearly have here. We have a combination of materials to form a construction adapted to permanent, temporary, or continuous occupancy and having a roof. A porch is a combination of materials adapted to temporary occupancy and having a roof. You sit on your porch, you're temporarily occupying the porch, and the porch has a roof. So I would argue that under the definition of building, I think it's quite clear that this building is 2,720 square feet. That becomes even clearer when you look at the definition of structure. The definition of structure in the MLUL is even broader than the definition of building. And the definition of structure, you'll bear with me for 1 minute again.
A combination of materials to form a construction for occupancy, use, or ornamentation, whether installed on, above, or below the surface of a parcel of land.
Correct. That's even broader than a definition of building. So I don't think there's any doubt under our ordinances that this is an accessory building or structure that is 2,720 square feet. And our ordinances are very, very clear that you're limited to 2,000. So the notion that the applicant does not need a size variance, to me, is just flat out wrong. The applicant does need a size variance. Then I look at what Elena sent us and her engineer's report. This is an application for a C variance, and a C variance, the applicant has to demonstrate certain things. The C1 variance, I don't think is relevant here. If the applicant believes that I'm wrong, we can discuss it, but I don't think this is even relevant to C1 because we're not seeking a hardship variance based on narrowness, shallowness, irregular shape, an exceptional topographic condition, or other unique conditions or features affecting the property. None of that has any bearing in this application. So the applicant is seeking a C2 variance. And to get a C2 variance, you have to demonstrate that the variance or that the relief that is sought furthers the purposes of the MLUL and that the benefits of granting the variance substantially outweigh the detriments. I don't see how granting this variance in any way, shape, or form furthers the purposes of the MLUL or furthers the purposes of our ordinances. The drafters of our ordinance specifically limited accessory buildings and structures to 2,000 square feet. In the agricultural district, you can go above that for farm structures. But outside of that, you're capped at 2,000 square feet. And in fact, in some districts, it's less than 2,000 square feet. The Village, for example, is significantly less than 2,000 square feet. So they were clearly focused on size in the various districts. And the Sourland Mountains also has a specific provision dealing with 2,000 square feet. I don't see how granting this furthers the purposes of the MLUL and how the benefits of granting this substantially outweigh the detriments. If you grant this variance, you're basically granting this variance because somebody wants, as I like to say, a large toy box. If we grant this variance, anybody who wants a large toy box will come in and say, I want a large toy box. Then what relevance does the 2,000 feet have, the 2,000 foot limitation? And this is particularly troubling on the mountain because the mountain is an environmentally sensitive area. And a broad swath was cleared to build this. We don't know how many trees were cut down. We have a receipt that says 9 trees were removed because of certain conditions, but the receipt doesn't say that only 9 trees were removed. It just says 9 were removed because of certain conditions. This is the exact sort of thing that I think the drafters were trying to avoid on the mountain. Cutting large swaths of trees, installing a very large structure that's going to have significant runoff. There's no clear answer as to what's going to happen when the rain barrels overflow. And in any heavy storm, these rain barrels are going to overflow. There's going to be a massive amount of water coming off that roof. That's not a roof for a 2,000 square foot structure. That's a roof for a 2,720 square foot structure. So if we were to approve this variance, in my mind, what relevance does the 2,000 square foot limitation in all of our ordinances have anymore? I don't know that it has any relevance. If somebody wants a 3,000 square foot toy box, how do you say no? So I don't see how this satisfies the criteria for a C2 variance. Then the applicant also has to satisfy the 2-pronged test of the negative criteria. The variance can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good. Well, I've already addressed that. I think a structure of this size on the mountain is detrimental to the public good. And the variance can be granted without causing substantial detriment to the zoning plan. As I've said already, I think this is going to cause very substantial detriment to our zoning plan. You're writing the 2,000 feet out. The next person who wants it, I know each application stands on its own, but how do I sit here if another person comes in and wants a 2,750 square foot toy box? How do you say no? So I don't see how we can grant this variance at the size of this structure. Elena? I mean, this was directed as much, I guess, as you and Bill as it is at sort of the general population. Do I have anything wrong here?
So I did want to note that the last township master plan re-examination was done in 2013. And in that re-exam, I have this in my review letter that, you know, the general guiding principle of the Sourland Mountain District is to ensure that new or expanded uses in the district do not negatively impact forest canopy, water quality or quantity, or other sensitive environmental resources. It also notes that in 2003, that a major concern was threats to the sustainability of water resources and protection of the fragile ecosystem of the Sourland Mountain from land use impacts, including concerns over increased clearing of forests and site disturbances associated with residential uses, including lawns, pools, outdoor recreation areas, etc. I think that I understand why the building needs to be located in the front yard. There is an existing building there, but I do have concerns over the size of the building, especially if it's, you know, requiring a variance relief for the size of it. The existing building, I believe, is 750 square feet or 875 square feet. And now we're replacing that with a, was it 2,700 square foot, 2,720 square foot building. And yeah, the 2,000 square foot accessory building is a very large building as it is, that the ordinance permits. Needing 2,000 square feet for storage because you don't have a basement is not a hardship. I understand that maybe you need a larger building than what's existing.
I don't have a garage either.
It's not a hardship.
And is 2,000 square foot on 12.7 acres a large building? Doesn't seem like it.
I have almost 3,000 square feet on 139
Right.
acres. Anybody who's seen that building says that's a big building.
Are you finished? Because I would like to address what the mayor said.
Sure.
First of all, your characterization of this as a toy box is, I think, a little bit insulting to my client. He testified under oath that he needs it for storage, and he's going to put vehicles in it, including vehicles that he uses on the property to take care of his property.
And his car collection.
I said that. Vehicles,
That's
those are
what-
vehicles.
But his car
Okay,
collection.
it's very insulting.
It's not intended as
Sure
an
it is.
insult. I refer to mine as a
That's how you
toy box.
characterize it. And for you to describe it as large swaths of trees being taken down, less than 10 trees are taken down on this property. So I don't know how you define swath, but 10 trees is not a swath.
Do you have your
Third-
arborist here this evening to testify to that effect?
I'm sorry?
Do you have your arborist to testify or your tree cutting service? to
He put it on the
testify?
record. He testified under oath.
I'd like your tree cutting service to
in terms of the
testify.
barrels that
I'd
you
like your
talked
tree
about.
cutting service to testify under oath that they only cut down the 8 trees that are on the receipt. That receipt was very carefully worded so that he could say, I'm telling the truth. I cut down 8 trees because they were diseased. He did not say he cut down only 8 trees. Please bring him before the board and let him testify
Can I
that he
finish
only
addressing
cut
your
down 8
comments,
trees.
or do we want to go back and forth? Can I finish?
You can, and then I'll follow up. I'll just take notes then.
Happy to do that. You're talking about the barrels, and the water would be gushing out of these barrels and running down the hill. If nothing were constructed here, it would be raining on the land, and that water would be rushing down the hill. Whether it goes into barrels and is temporarily stored makes no overall difference on what happens with the water that would be hitting the land underneath the building. And your use of the municipal land use law, well, I can't recite exactly what you read from the ordinance. You described a building including a porch, indicating that even the definition under the municipal land use law contemplates something that is not part of the building and would not be included in the square footage of the building, i.e. a porch. I'm sure you can find definitions of porches, including in your ordinance, that accept them from the principal structure or an accessory structure. So for you to say that the municipal land use law governs and we still need a variance, I still dispute that by saying that the building is the enclosed portion of the building. It doesn't include what can be characterized as a porch or an awning or simply a cover to a garage.
You finished?
That's it. Sure.
The notion that if the building weren't there, the water would be running down the hill, if we bought into that notion, many of our restrictions that apply when you construct a structure would be written right out of the books. So that comment makes no sense to me. Because when you build a house, we require a stormwater management plan. Under your argument, why do we require it? If the house weren't there, the water would be hitting up the ground and running down the hill. The reason we require it is because while the ground is soft and can absorb water, the roof of the building is not soft, does not absorb water, and the water is directed in artificial directions. So that argument to me carries zero weight.
Okay.
In no point in reading the definition of building did I refer to porch.
Yes, you did when you read the municipal, read it again.
The definition of building,
Under the municipal land use law that you read before, talked about a porch.
bear with me, I have to get to, wait, I can actually read it here.
Would you like me to read it, Mayor? I have it right in front of me.
No, I'll.
Sure.
Building means a combination of materials to form a construction. I want to make sure that I have your attention. Building means a combination of materials to form a construction adapted to permanent, temporary, or continuous occupancy and having a roof. Tell me where in that definition I said the word porch.
Reading. You read-
That's the
you
whole
continue
definition.
to
That's the
read-
definition.
That's the whole
Okay.
definition.
Well, you continued to read something after that that referred to a porch. What was the next definition that you read?
Structure.
I read the definition of structure.
Actually, I did.
Oh, you did, that is true. Structure means a combination of materials to form a construction for occupancy, use, or ornamentation, whether installed on, above, or below the surface of a parcel of land. You tell me where porch was in that
And
definition.
I might have been mistaken, but
You were
under your
mistaken on a
ordinance-
number of things. When you said our ordinances do not define building or structure, you were mistaken. They do. They define it right up front. So you were mistaken there. You were
and
mistaken.
various interpretations throughout your ordinance accept out porch areas, including structures that are supported by columns or whatever.
I don't have to look at those exceptions. I have specifically defined terms. I have a provision that says an accessory building structure or use shall not exceed 2,000 square feet. I have a definition that defines building. I have a definition that defines structure. I don't have to look beyond that. I have everything I need in a nice little package. Our ordinance is abundantly clear. This is 2,720 square feet. It is not 2,000. I don't need to look beyond the four corners of those definitions.
And the applicant would disagree with your interpretation that this is a 2,720 square foot roof and a 2,000 square foot building. We can go around all night if you would like, but I think your
You can,
position has been
you can,
stated.
but-
and-
but
and-
if-
and
but
ours
please,
has been
but
stated.
please don't, because at
No.
the end of the day, the board is empowered.
I
to
know, I
make
understand that,
interpretation.
and I'm simply trying to say that we disagree with how you're interpreting that section of your ordinance as we have testified and discussed tonight.
And that's duly noted on the
And-
record. Thank you for that, but the board is going to make that
And,
interpretation.
and
And Mayor Wolf is simply putting his opinion on the record, and I'm sure that we will hear from other board members as well.
And I
We don't
would-
have to debate each one
No,
of
no,
them.
no.
They're making the
But
decision.
if I would like to have our planner revisit if we are going to consider this a variance, and maybe it would take to have the board decide whether we consider this variance
I thought that
something
that's-
still a variance.
That's what we were doing right now.
Okay,
We're
but
having a discussion amongst the
In the
board.
event that it is stated that the variance is still required, then I would like to have our planner reiterate the planning testimony he put in on the C2 variance, the justification for the variance. Thank you.
Chairman, that's fair. If that's the way you want to proceed, I believe that that's fair. To allow the planner to testify with regard to the C2 or whichever variance the planner will testify to. And that's once the board decides that a variance is needed based upon your interpretation. Now, you have already heard Mayor Wolf's opinion. You have heard the opinion of our planner. What does the rest of the board think about what you've heard? And what is your interpretation? Is this something that requires a C variance?
Well, let's express the question clearly.
Yes.
Under our ordinances, is this a 2,000 square foot structure, which does not require a size variance, or a 2,720 square foot structure, which does require a size variance? That's the question on the table. You've heard my reading of the provisions, and you've heard theirs. I don't know if Elena or Bill have any views on this. If they do, I'd like to hear them also. But because I'm just a member of the planning board.
Elena or Bill, do you have comments?
I don't necessarily have anything to add. I don't disagree with the mayor's position. He certainly read the definitions, and I think the definitions speak for themselves. Certainly up for the board to decide that, but it was pretty clear in my view. The reading of the definitions.
And I would also agree. I think primarily because of the definition of accessory building structure or use, 6D says that no accessory building, structure, or use shall be allowed over 2,000 square feet. So therefore, it's the building and structure, the entire envelope of whatever that is not allowed to exceed 2,000 square feet.
Yolanda, do you have a view on this?
I tend to agree with our professionals. I looked at the ordinance before I got here this evening, and I don't want to sway the board one way or another because it is your decision.
Can you say where in the code? I know you referred back to that MULU, but where in the code did you find that?
Section 92 is our land management section.
Right,
That's
but which part of 92?
92-4, terms defined. And if you look, it says the following words and phrases in this chapter are used as defined in the municipal land use law. And then it lists a series of words or phrases, one of which is building and the other of which is structure.
That's paragraph 8.
And so you then go to the
Okay.
MLUL for those
Yep,
definitions,
got it.
which is what I read.
Right.
Anybody else on the board? Mark? Are you gonna comment after you read?
I know, good. That sounds good.
Natalie,
Natalie,
any comments?
any comments? No.
So what is the consensus of the board? Is the consensus of the board that is it that a C variance is required for that additional square footage that is beyond the interior of that building, that's 720 square feet? Is that the board's consensus that the applicant requires that variance, or does the board believe, as the applicant has argued, that is part of, that should not be counted toward a part of that 2,000 maximum square feet?
So hang on 1 second. I just want to give Marnie. She wants to see the definition of structure. It's right there. And if you flip back and do these, you'll get the definition of building. And I have a sticky word. You want to keep that with you?
No, I'm good.
I would poll the board. Board members?
You want Chris to take a roll call?
All the members?
Yep.
As to whether this is going to be.
So the question is whether it requires a variance or not.
C2 variance?
Yes.
Mike Mills?
Am I able to abstain from a decision? I want to do a little bit more research on some of these cases that might have arisen. Do I have to have a defined yes or no?
Well, the board has to make a decision, I mean, tonight, hopefully, because the applicant is here and the applicant is asking for a decision. So, and this is something that will be voted on officially at the end of the hearing. But what we need to do now is, for the applicant's purposes, we need to tell the applicant whether or not they should be putting their planner back on and having the planner testify. That's what we discussed earlier, that if the board were to determine that 720 square feet requires a variance, that the applicant's planner would once again testify in that regard. So it's fair at this point, I think, to be able to tell the applicant whether or not this board believes in, whether or not this board will ultimately determine that something like that requires that bulk variance.
Is this a majority or is this a all or nothing?
Well, whenever a board makes an interpretation, it is a majority, but this is something that the board should contemplate and should agree on, because an interpretation is precedential. While not a lot of what the board does is precedential when it applies to a specific application, but when the board is interpreting its own law, that is precedential. So this should be something that you agree on as a board.
Based on the definition, let's say yes.
Okay.
Natalie?
Yeah, I think it does require variance.
Marnie?
Can I say more than just yes or no?
Absolutely.
So you have me because I do not find that things are entirely clear in our code. But having looked at the definition, which is basically anything under a roof, I think that it does, that awning does count as part of the structure. And I think that it does require it because of the extra 7.
Jackson?
I would say yes, does require variance.
Mark?
Yeah, I have to agree with Marnie that I think anything under the roof.
Rick?
The structure.
Oh, sorry.
Should require.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I almost cut you off, so sorry.
Sorry. Yes.
I'm sorry.
I think it should require signature.
Okay. Rick?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Okay, you still need to see variance.
Kim, appreciate you doing that. Paul, still here?
I am still here.
Thank you. Can you reiterate your testimony on positive and negative criteria for the C2 variance? For both the variances, the accessory structure in the front yard and the size variance.
Certainly. I did go into great detail at the prior hearing, so I apologize if it's a bit repetitive. But the applicant is seeking, again, those 2 variances Mike just mentioned.
Mr. Greigel, before you go on, you were sworn at the last hearing, correct?
Yes,
And you acknowledge that you're still under oath?
I do.
Thank you.
Thanks. So just to reemphasize some of the main points, the applicant is proposing this building where there was already development that has occurred on the property. And again, for the record, the property is 12.7 acres roughly in area. The proposed building would be set back over 300 feet from the closest property line of any lot on Lindbergh Road, 155 feet from the side lot lines adjacent to an undeveloped wooded tract. So this is an accessory structure, as we've heard. We've reduced it from the prior proposal. With regard to the variances that are being sought, I do believe they still can be granted under the C2 criteria. But more specifically for the first one, the accessory structure in the front yard, that would be a C1 hardship, given the existing nature of this flag lot and the improvements lawfully existing on it. You have a home set way towards the back of the property that essentially creates a front yard for the 700 feet in front of it is considered front yard under the ordinance. There's really no other place to locate any structures without causing more impact on existing trees, vegetation around the side and the rear of the property.
And the tree conservation buffer as well.
Correct, yes. And again, we went into detail at the last hearing, but with regard to the front yard area, this is, again, we're dealing with a 250-foot flag section of the lot. We have 100-foot minimum front yard required. We're keeping over 300 feet from any building on the lot to the nearest lot lines on Lindbergh Road and over 550 feet from the structure to Lindbergh Road. So again, this is, I think with regard to that first variance, it's relatively straightforward. It'd be almost impossible to locate any accessory structure in a side or rear yard without creating additional variances for side or rear yard setbacks. Again, this is a uniquely shaped property. It's adjacent to a number of smaller lots fronting on Lindbergh Road. If we had the house located further forward on the lot, it actually has a right, again, theoretically, if there's a house built there today, instead of what exists, it could be set forward a few hundred feet closer to the road, which would open up the rear yard to additional development. That's not the case here, but because the building is there, I don't think that's a reasonable solution to tear down existing house just to comply to provide an area for the accessory structure. With regard to the second variance, the size of the accessory structure, again, the 2,000 square foot is proposed in terms of the area with walls around it. The board's interpreted the overall area to be 2,720 square feet. In terms of the reasoning for the size of the structure, the applicant has discussed that the house has no garage or basement. Theoretically, the house could be enlarged and still comply with the coverage requirements, setback requirements, provide a much larger dwelling on the property to have those functions. The applicant instead is proposing to place these functions, the storage, the accessory uses within a separate building where one exists already today. This actually helps minimize disturbance to existing trees and natural features. If it was attached to the dwelling, we would have no such limitations and the applicant could build, again, a much larger dwelling. In terms of the variance for this particular standard, I do believe it still could be granted under the C2 criteria. The deviation would allow for replacement of an existing accessory building with one that's larger in a previously developed location, and the benefits from requested deviation would outweigh any detriments. And I do think a purpose of the municipal land use law, purpose C, providing for adequate light, air, and open space is met. The building is set back over 300 feet from any lots on Lindbergh Road, 155 feet from the side lot line, or 2 to 3 times the minimums required. We do not exceed the maximum lot coverage. We're also 550 feet back from the street. To put the additional square footage in context of this property of 12.7 acres, the additional 720 square feet represents 0.13% of the lot area. So I understand there's a concern that 2,000 square feet is a sacrosanct number. Variances are allowed to be granted when the circumstances warrant it. When you have a property of this size, this regulation applies for 2,000 square feet to a 2-acre lot or a 200-acre lot. In this case, we are significantly larger than the number of the lots in the surrounding area, and therefore it can be accommodated. We do need to address the negative criteria as well. And just to be clear, the law talks about there being no substantial detriment to the public good. So I think in this case, we're talking about the additional 720 square feet of roof area and whether that 0.13% of the lot area would have substantial negative impacts on neighboring properties or the township. I frankly find it hard to see any way that that minimal square footage in and of itself could cause substantial detriment when set back 300 feet from the nearest properties along Lindbergh Road, 150 feet from side lot lines, in an area that's already developed. We do have extensive wooded areas throughout the site, particularly bordering adjacent properties. These will remain other than the minimal tree removal where we've already talked about. The dwelling complies with all bulk standards except for lot area for the overall property. Where within coverage limits, setbacks greatly exceed the minimums required. So I think considering that you could build a house much closer to the street, which would be closer to the neighboring properties than this accessory structure, the additional 720 square feet would not have a substantial negative impacts on the public good. With regard to the master plan and zoning ordinance, again, I reemphasize the question is whether the impacts are substantial. In this case, we have a deviation that relates to conditions on the site in the comparison to neighboring properties that are much smaller and are set back some distance from there. The board's planner noted again some of these principles of the Sauerland Mountain District in the master plan reexamination to try to ensure that the new expanded uses do not impact the forest canopy, water quality or quantity, or sensitive environmental resources. Again, I offer that 720 square feet of additional roof area would not be substantially impacting those resources. Respectfully, again, there needs to be consideration of the context of the property and its setting and what's being proposed here. So I think with regard to whether there's any substantial negative impact on the master plan, it's been noted that every variance needs to be judged on its own merits. And while I agree that the interpretation that the board just made would have precedential value, certainly no other applicant could come in unless they have the exact same conditions on their property and make the same arguments and expect to be granted a variance. But I think in light of this particular property of 12.7 acres and its location of the accessory building on that acreage, that there would be no substantial negative impacts on the master plan and zoning ordinance. Lastly, with regard to that, again, this board has the ability to grant variances. The municipal land use law allows for it. If there was no opportunity to grant variances, from a standard that applies on smaller properties, larger properties throughout the entire township, there's no reason for us to be here. I think that you can consider that there are specific circumstances that warrant sometimes granting variances. So with regard to everything I've mentioned, I think it's clear to me at least that the variances can be granted in accordance with the applicable criteria. The C2 for the additional 720 square feet and the C1 for the location of the accessory building. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Do you have an opportunity to comment on that?
I was gonna ask Elena. If you had-
No, that's fine.
Elena, do you have?
I don't have any comments, at this time at least.
I have a question for you. Elena, if he were to take the awning, or whatever we want to call it, off the accessory building and put it on his house, would he be able to do that?
I would think that it would need to conform to the setbacks of the principal structure, but I don't think there's anything prohibiting him from doing that. Krista, is that?
No.
Okay.
And it wouldn't increase the size of our structure. If you
It would have to
put-
conform to the setbacks.
Understood, but it wouldn't increase the size of the structure. The principal
No,
building,
principal-
in other words, if you put an awning over your deck, you're not increasing the size of the structure. If you put an awning over a porch, you're not increasing the size of the structure.
Correct.
That's
When it's the
what you're
principal
getting
structure,
at.
right. Well, I was just curious.
If it were, in other words, I could interpret what I think you're saying
I was just curious.
are they treated differently because it's a principal structure and an accessory structure?
Well, I know they are, but I'm just curious what other, what hurdles there would be to doing that. It's the setback.
Yeah, it would need to, I would think I would have to double check all the definitions, but it would seem as though it would need to conform to all the setbacks to the
And
principal
having-
structure.
And at least, well, I couldn't find it in the Salaman Mountain District, but in the Agricultural Valley District, it would not count. It can impinge on the setback up to 10 feet, which I believe our awning is.
That's it.
I have a few comments. First of all, the comment that the planner made that the 2,000 square foot limitation applies to lots of all sizes is not correct. If you look at the Salaman Mountain, our bulk regulations, the test is that the accessory building shall not occupy an area totaling more than 25% of a required rear yard or a maximum of 2,000 square feet, whichever is smaller. So the 2,000 square feet does not apply to any size lot. You need a sizable lot for the 2,000 square feet.
You're assuming the size of the rear yard.
I'm just
If
telling
the
you,
rear yard were,
I thought before you wanted me to let you finish,
go ahead,
and then
I'm sorry.
you could
I
respond.
apologize.
Second, the notion that the additional 720 square feet is minimal. It's 36% over the cap. I don't view 36% over a cap as minimal. If it were 2,005 feet, we'd say 5 feet is minimal. 36% over the cap isn't minimal. 3, this is not a uniquely shaped lot by any means. We have lots of flag lots in East Amwell Township, lots and lots of flag lots. This is a flag lot. Go on to Google Maps, look at this lot, look at the lot lines. It is not a unique lot in any way, shape, or form. The notion that we should approve this because the house could have been enlarged, again, if you go down that road, you're writing the 2,000 square foot limitation on accessory structures out of our ordinance. Because then you would be saying that anytime anybody could build a house that still has at least, say 2,500 square feet of space that you could build or add on to your house, you could build a 2,500 square foot accessory building. That's not the test. The test isn't, well, you can go over the 2,000 square feet if you could have added more than 2,000 square feet to your house. The test is applicable to the accessory building or structure by itself. If you were going to add 2,000 square feet to your house, you'd be subject to a host of requirements that apply when you're trying to build a house. So that's not the test. You have to judge this accessory building as a separate structure. Again, as I said earlier, I don't see how this advances the cause of our zoning ordinances or the MLUL. And if we go down this road, where does it stop? And I understand that each application has to be judged on its own merits, but there's nothing unique about this application. It's a 12-foot lot, a 12-foot property, 12-acre property. 12 acres is not extraordinarily large or extraordinarily small in East Amwell. We have plenty of properties that are bigger. We have plenty of properties that are smaller. We have plenty of properties that are around the same size. There's nothing unique about this that justifies a variance. So if you say yes to this, I don't know how you say no to anybody who wants to go over the 2,000 square feet. And there hasn't been any compelling reason to go over the 2,000 square feet other than the owner, the applicant, wants something bigger. I mean, if that's the test that we grant the variance because somebody wants something bigger, it's going to write a whole host of provisions right out of our ordinances. Because we have all sorts of size limitations, not just limitations on accessory buildings. And our zoning ordinances are even stricter on the mountain. The mountain probably, I mean, I haven't sat down and done a comparison, but the mountain probably has the strictest zoning ordinances of any district in East Amwell. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for the 15-acre minimum. There's a reason for a whole host of ordinances that apply to the mountain because it's an environmentally sensitive area. And the notion that locating it somewhere else on the property would have required cutting down trees. Trees were cut down here. And not just 8. So do we want to reward somebody for cutting down the trees first and then coming in?
Well, I think you're doing a great disservice to Mr. Gallagher. He went to the township, applied for a building permit, to put up a structure, was given that building permit by this township. Nobody saw a problem with it. He went to put it up, someone came up and inspected it and said, hey, you have to stop and apply to the board. That's how we got here. 9 months ago, perhaps. Seems to me that all the arguments you're making, you're lumping the saving of the entire Sourland district on this one application. What Mr. Greigel was saying, and you agreed with him when you said that each case has to be decided on its merits. He wasn't talking about this being a unique lot within East Amwell Township. He was talking about the unique circumstances of this lot, a flag lot where the house is located at the extreme rear of the property. That creates a hardship. Mr. Gallagher didn't create it. He bought the property that way, and he's attempting to do something. And there was a structure on his property that he can no longer use because it leaks and it's falling down. And he wanted to replace it with something. He came in with a large building. He listened to what the board had to say. I thought he was doing the right thing by coming back with I understand how you interpret this, but my position still remains that this is a 2,000 square foot building with a covered porch or a covered driveway, however you want to characterize it. If you go home tonight, when you walk up onto your front steps, you consider yourself in a building before or after you open the door?
I consider myself under a structure though.
You consider yourself in the building before or after you open the door?
It's accessory buildings and structure.
This is a building. A structure would be something other than a building. This is a building, perhaps with an additional structure on it, but this is a building, a 2,000 square foot building, and perhaps there's an attachment to it that could be considered a porch. But We don't have to revisit.
No, we do not.
So the entire purpose for the municipal land use law and your zoning ordinance is to deal with unique situations. And you have here a situation with, despite your characterization, a uniquely shaped lot with a house that was built towards the extreme rear, which effectively limits Mr. Gallagher's ability to put up a conforming structure. He thought he was doing the right thing by replacing an existing decrepit structure with a new structure, so that he could have storage space, he could put his vehicles so they're not in his front yard, so that they would be stored neatly, and he could reorganize his property so that it is neat and well kept. And that's all he's trying to do, okay? If there's a 720-foot overhang on a 2,000 square foot building, I believe it is de minimis. When you talk about, I forget the number Paul used, but I believe 0.13% of the entire lot. Now, you talked about how a 2,000 square foot building could be reduced in size if we're on, say, a 5,000 square foot lot. And that may be true, but it would be to scale. This building is to scale for this property. It's tiny on this property at 2,000 square feet with an overhang. And I think Mr. Greigel's testimony more than merits granting this application in terms of the two variances that are requested. If, and the board was polled and believes the second variance is still required, but we're clearly on the record as disputing that, and it would leave it open to appeal.
There's nothing in these two definitions of building and structure that to me in any way, shape, or form implies that they're mutually exclusive. This is both a building and a structure. Second, the drafters of our ordinance did choose to take into account the size of the lot in computing the cap on the size of an accessory building. That's why on the Sauerland Mountain, an accessory building shall not occupy an area totaling more than 25% of the required rear yard or a maximum of 2,000 square feet, whichever is smaller. So they put a 2,000 square foot cap that gets smaller on smaller lots. They didn't turn it the other way, which they could have, and said, if you have a lot that's above a certain threshold, you can go over the 2,000 square feet. This was a one-way definition. You can go down, you cannot go up. So I don't buy into that at all.
I'm not disputing that that's your position.
You got upset with me when I interrupted you, but yet you keep interrupting me.
I thought you were finished.
No, I'll raise my hand when I'm finished. You're young, you go fast like a hare. I'm old, I go slow like a turtle. Okay, I get there, but it takes me a while. Okay. You keep referring to this as unique. It's not unique, and his house isn't up against his rear property line. There's a significant distance between his house and his rear property line. Now, my focus isn't the front yard versus the backyard, because in my mind, I don't even need to get to that. I can't see how we can justify granting a variance, a size variance, for this structure, whether it were in the front yard, the backyard, or the side yard. I don't see how we can grant a variance for a structure that is over the 2,000 square foot cap. I have heard nothing that indicates a hardship here. You don't need a 2,720 square foot structure for storage.
I'm finished stating my position, and I've heard yours several times. So I don't have anything further to say in that regard, unless Paul, you have anything additional to add in terms of what you stated before.
There's a number of things I could say, but I think I've put it out there, I believe, pretty clearly on the record with regard to the relative size of the overhang to the property. That's what I was referring to as far as a minimal amount. I agree that, it's not minimal compared to 2,000 square feet. I would just say one comment, 2,000 square feet, it's that, or 25% of the rear yard. If you do the math on that, it's not a gigantic rear yard that allows up to, to 2,000 square feet. So, if we can say, I guess on a very small lot, perhaps on a half-acre lot, then you're not able to get that amount. But I would venture to say that with the many large lots throughout East Amwell, it'd be no problem to get up to that 2,000 square foot within the rear yard. The issue here, though, is the building is 700 feet or so back from the street. That's a very deep front yard. So I think there should be a clear delineation, at least on the board's part. I would respectfully offer that there are two variances here and to not conflate the two. There is a hardship with regard, I think it's unquestionable, there's a hardship with regard to locating an accessory building on the property. To say it should be behind more than 750 feet back from the street because the building is, the house is already there, does not make sense, especially if it's wooded back there and you'd be causing more disturbance. I understand there's differing of opinions on the size of the building and the variances for that. I do believe I put in the C2 criteria that address that, in my reading of the ordinance in the municipal land use law, the master plan, et cetera. That's the board's decision, of course, to make whether you agree or not with that. But I think that
And as we testified,
factors that warrant consideration.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. I was wrapping up to say, I think there are some factors that are, warrant consideration by the board.
And as was testified at the last meeting by, I believe, yourself and our engineer, the size of Mr. Gallagher's backyard is considerably reduced by the tree conservation buffer.
Yes.
Shape of the lot at the rear of the house, plus the fact that his septic field is located in that area as well.
There are limitations there. I know in the interest of trying to not rehash everything from last time, I didn't go back into detail on that, but there were limitations that were testified to in the rear yard and the side yards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have nothing else. But thank you for giving me the time.
Anybody else? Natalie?
Yeah.
Comments now? We're going to-
I think folks know how I feel about it.
Any other board comments?
I would say that the 720 additional square feet relative to the property side is pretty significant, in my opinion. But then again, definitions and definitions.
Well, that may be true, but as we discussed before, the municipal land use law is, it was enacted by the legislature to give municipalities the power to zone. So, and that's what you've done. You've enacted a zoning ordinance and it has certain regulations. But what the municipal land use law also allows this board to do is to grant deviations from your zoning ordinance if the applicant has satisfied the statutory criteria. And in this case, you heard that it was, these are bulk variances. So we're talking about a C1 hardship variance or a C2 the benefits outweighing the detriments variance. And you have heard the applicant say that the fact that this structure needs to be located in the front yard is a hardship. And the fact that this structure is 720 approximately square feet larger than it is permitted to be is a benefit that outweighs the detriment under the C2 standard of the law. So your zoning ordinance is what it is and it says what it says, but you are permitted as a board to grant exceptions if you believe that testimony that's been placed on the record satisfies that criteria. And also that was the positive criteria. The negative criteria is that there is a substantial detriment to the neighboring properties, and the focus there is on neighboring properties and whether or not there is a detriment to the zone plan or the zoning ordinance or the master plan. And you've also heard testimony in that regard, both from your planner, Elena, and from Mr. Greigel, the applicant's planner. So now what the board can do, what the board has been asked to do, is to grant these two variances. The applicant's position is that they only need one variance. The board's position is that they still need two variances. So, I'm sorry?
We argued in the alternative that if the
Correct,
variance.
correct. And of course, the applicant, yes, has put, as I mentioned, Mr. Gregor did put testimony on the record with regard to both variances. I guess the applicant's position was, or preferable position is that they want one variance. The board finds that they need two. They have placed testimony for two. So what the board can do is either grant this application, deny this application, or grant a portion of this application. So that's up to the board. Yes.
Say something to me about, explain to me a little more in the C, test for the C variance, the benefit, detriment. Benefit to who? Benefit to the applicant or benefit to the
No,
residents?
these are general land use benefits. So, Mr. Greigel, can you go over some of that which you mentioned? And I know that you mentioned it in the last hearing. If you could please refresh the board's recollection and mine, because I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, well, and I'll let him go in a minute. You frame it in terms of the purposes of the municipal land use law and the stated goals of your own master plan.
Yes. So, Mr. Greigel, please, you can.
Sure. It's been some time since last hearing, so I may not be able to put the exact same testimony in, but the benefits, generally speaking, you have a residential zone, which has a variety of lot sizes and I think differing expectations of what could be built on a property. Here, it's a reasonable use of a property that is much larger. And I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I do think it's worth considering, the context of the property compared to the neighboring properties on Lindbergh, which are, again, I don't have the numbers right handy, but much, much smaller in size. Our property is larger than a number of them together. So I think the consideration is to allow for reasonable use, relative to the property. There are other benefits include trying to minimize disturbance. And again, I know there's concern about a few of the trees that were taken down in the middle of the property. I still think there's benefits to trying to develop where you already have development occurring and to not incur, additional intrusion into the tree buffers. We have the septic field in the rear. So the benefits include trying to, again, minimize disturbance where the existing accessory building already exists as well. This is where you have a driveway, where you have right now out in the open, animals, vehicles, other equipment that's out there in the open. There's benefits to the neighbors from enclosing that as well. Again, I know I wasn't prepared to address this in detail, so I'm sorry if I'm just throwing random sounding things out there, but there are, I believe, benefits, even though there's somewhere for the property owner in terms of enclosing, some of these outdoor activities, those also are benefits that accrue to neighboring property owners and just generally to the township by encouraging, development in accordance with the residential character of the area. Even on the mountain, you are allowed a certain amount of development. We're relatively close to the intensity. We certainly meet the intent by the enclosed area being 2,000 square feet. I think the additional 720 square feet, again, is minimal compared to the size of the lot.
Paul, I have the outline that we kind of reviewed and discussed last time, and you cited, I believe, when you testified, two purposes of the municipal land use law: to encourage municipal action to guide the appropriate use or development of all lands in the state in a manner which will promote public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. This development proposes new use to replace non-conforming use on an existing developed site. And you also stated that it provides adequate light, air, and open space. The building is set back over 300 feet from lots on Lindbergh Road and 155 feet from the side lot line, or 2 to 3 times the minimums required. That's what you put on the record at the last hearing.
That's correct. And I did reemphasize the light, air, and open space tonight, but yeah, I didn't want to keep everything we said last time.
To point out that the testimony is based in the actual language of municipal land use law. Purposes of the municipal land use
That
law.
is the standard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna
Hopefully I addressed your question.
articulate again what she said earlier about the master plan as it applies to Sour Mountains.
Sure, it's in my planning review, I believe it's my planning comment number 2 on page 4 of my report. In the 2013 master plan re-exam, a major concern in 2003 where threats to the sustainability of water resources and protection of the fragile ecosystem of the Sauerland Mountain from land use impacts, including concerns over increased clearing of forests and site disturbances associated with residential use, including lawns, pools, outdoor recreation areas, etc. Further, the re-exam report notes that the district remains a concern for long-term planning and that the general guiding principle of the district is to ensure that new or expanded uses in the district do not negatively impact forest canopy, water quality or quantity, or other sensitive environmental resources.
The way I read that, or the way I hear that, is that the goal was to try to minimize development on the mountain, to leave it in its natural state. I'd also like to read again the criteria for the C2 variance. It requires a finding that the proposed variance relief furthers the purposes of the MLUL and that the benefits of granting the variance substantially outweigh the detriments. I do not see how the benefits of granting this variance substantially outweigh the detriments. I'm not even seeing the benefits of granting this variance. The negative criteria, both of which have to be satisfied, is the variance can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good, and the variance can be granted without causing substantial detriment to the zone plan. Allowing a 2,720 square foot structure when we clearly have a 2,000 square foot cap, to me, is causing a substantial detriment to the zone plan. And the notion that this property is unique or it's larger than the surrounding properties is not correct. It's not unique. And I'm looking here at Google Maps, and there are plenty of surrounding properties that are significantly larger than this property. They're multiples of the size of this property. In fact, the property behind 172, I can't even see the whole thing on a single screen. It's so large. Across the street, there are several properties that are significantly larger than this property. So this property isn't the elephant in the room. This property is neither the largest nor the smallest. It's sort of in the middle. There's nothing unique about this. So I don't see how the criteria for the C2 variance is satisfied here when it comes to the size of this property. I'm sorry, the size of this structure.
The only thing I would state in response to that is that the test is not that the benefits substantially outweigh the detriments, just that they outweigh the detriments. You threw in an extra substantial there.
Well, I'm reading from Elena's. Let me actually read directly.
I'll read directly
Thank
from
you.
the C2, where in an application or appeal relating to a specific piece of property, the purpose of this act, I'm leaving out the purposes of the Educational Facilities Act, would be advanced by a deviation from the zoning ordinance requirements, and the benefits of the deviation would substantially outweigh any detriment. That's the MLUL.
The substantially is right there.
I apologize.
Do we vote now?
Well, the board can deliberate further, or the board can take a vote. And as I said before, the board can either grant what the applicant is asking for, the board can deny what the applicant is asking for, or the board can partially grant and partially deny what the applicant is asking for. I have heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, as the board has been discussing this application, I have not heard any board member, and perhaps it's because you haven't said anything yet, but I haven't heard anyone quarrel with the fact that perhaps the location of this structure may very well be a hardship, and it may very well belong in that front yard, or it may not be a detriment for it to belong in the front yard. However, the size has been an issue, and that has been articulated by more than one board member. And if the board sees fit, the board might grant this application and allow for that structure, that 2,000-foot structure to be built in that front yard, but without that 720-foot overhang. If the board denies the variance for the size, that is what the board will effectively be doing, is allowing for the 2,000 square foot structure to be built because they are permitted to have that, but the board would not be permitting the additional overhang that would be 720 square feet. So those are your choices. And if the board sees fit to approve any part of this application, then I'd like to go over some of the conditions that might be imposed if you were to approve all or some of this application.
I guess we're gonna have to deliberate on that. I mean, it's a feeling that if we were to have Mr. Gallagher remove the lean-to part of it, I personally know the front yard, and there's no other, to me, this thing doesn't go, you couldn't put a shed behind your house. I know your property, so, but yeah, to me, it's the square footage is, I think, is everybody's concern. I would be, put it to a vote that we put the condition that the lean-to is not allowed, and you're allowed to build the 2,000 square foot building. I don't know, I'm sure that's going to disappoint you, but I have to agree with Rick about that. Once the cat's out of the bag, how many more times are we going to be doing this? He's, Mr. Gallagher has reduced the size of the building to 2,000 square foot, which is allowable. So do we? What's everybody's feelings? Do we take a vote on a 2,000 square foot barn, or
If I could just say something real quick.
Certainly.
I think perhaps instead of just saying that, allow them, if you were to approve it, because it seems as though the board's kind of held up on the size, I would recommend that you would approve it based, and that's a condition that the accessory building and structure does not exceed 2,000 square feet. So if they want to shrink the overall footprint to include the lean-to, they could, or if they want to just keep the building, they could, to give them more options rather than just saying no lean-to.
Thank you. That's probably a good idea. Consensus? Natalie, you have any comments?
Natalie, do you have any comments?
That's another option. Shrink the building and include the overhang to shrink the
Right.
enclosed part of the building.
Yeah.
That's another option.
That's another option, because since the board has already interpreted that 2,000 square feet, at least in this case, it's 2,000 square feet, but that the structure, the accessory structure, includes things that are not necessarily walled in, like a building would be, or as the applicant posited that a building would be. Since the board has already made that interpretation, then what would be granted if the board decided not to grant that C variance, that one bulk variance for the extra 700 square feet, the option for the applicant would be they can build something up to 2,000 square feet. That something can be a fully enclosed structure or building, or it could be a partially open structure or building. It could be a, for example, 1,500 square foot pole barn or garage with a 500 square foot lean-to, and they would still fit within that 2,000 square foot limitation that the ordinance puts on accessory structures. So since the board already made that interpretation, I don't think you can say that you must or you shall, because they're allowed to up to 2,000 square feet.
Could I ask you a legal question?
Sure.
In deciding whether to grant a variance, can the board take into account whether the applicant has clean hands? In other words, whether the applicant has been truthful and accurate on the application and in testimony?
Absolutely. Well, the board must take the applicant's sworn testimony as the truth, effectively, unless there is other testimony, sworn testimony, that is placed upon the record that rebuts something that the applicant has placed on the record. The applicant swore to tell the truth, so the board has to take that effectively, as the applicant's word that they're telling the truth, unless there is testimony that's placed on the record, which would tend to show or demonstrate that something that the applicant said was untrue.
Well, look, at the last hearing, I pointed out a number of what I'll delicately call inconsistencies. And I'm very skeptical that they were inadvertent. They're too obvious and blatant.
There are some, as you say, inconsistencies that perhaps have to do with enforcement, which doesn't have to do with this board. It's more from the standpoint of the township. So if there is something that is happening where an applicant or a property owner who isn't an applicant is doing something that they shouldn't be doing in contravention of the ordinance, then that's what you have the zoning officer for, to send them out to give notices of violation. Once an application is before the board must take that application into consideration. Now, the board can grant the relief if the board believes that they've satisfied the statutory criteria, or if the board does not believe that the statutory criteria has been satisfied, can deny it. But really what the applicant was talking about what happened before the applicant came to this board, it's irrelevant to this proceeding. And in the same manner, any inconsistency that has to do with enforcement is also relatively irrelevant to this matter. I would have to know more about what inconsistencies you're talking about, Mayor, but if in general, that's my opinion.
But to be a little more specific, if the application otherwise satisfied the requirements for a particular variance, but getting to that point, there were misrepresentations in the application. If there are misrepresentations in the application, but the application otherwise qualifies, are we bound to grant it, or can we take into account that there were misrepresentations and say that the applicant did not have clean hands? Because if you come to a court of equity and you ask for equitable relief, and you don't have clean hands, the court will not give you equitable relief, even if you otherwise would qualify. That's really what I'm asking here. Do you have to have clean hands? If you do not have clean hands, can a variance be denied because you don't have clean hands?
No, this doesn't function like a court of equity.
Okay, that was my question.
If what was in the application was never corrected on the record, and I believe I know what you're talking about, and I think it was corrected, and I believe that our planner referenced it in her planning report and asked the question, and I think that at our last hearing, we did have that discussion, and I think you're referencing whether or not this is an agricultural use or an agricultural building. Is that correct?
That is one of the things.
That's one of the things.
That
And
is correct.
I believe that that has been, as long as the board is not under the impression that this is in some way something that it isn't, and I think that was clarified on the record, then no. Then if they satisfy the criteria, then they satisfy the criteria. That's a legal question.
Okay.
And it's, yeah.
Thank you. You answered my question. Thank you. Tim, I'm fine putting it to a vote along the lines of what you just described.
So how are we going to put the conditions? We're going to say there's a total of 2,000 square foot allowed.
Okay, so if the board's position is that a total of 2,000 square feet a structure of 2,000 square feet is the only thing that you're going to allow on this property because you find that the applicant did not present sufficient evidence to justify granting a variance for an additional 720 feet, then what the board is effectively doing is granting the 1C variance for the location of this structure in the front yard, but the board is not granting the second C variance for the expansion or the addition of an additional 700 square feet above that which is permitted. So that's what I'm hearing that the board is doing. Now, what the applicant does with that 2,000 square feet is up to the applicant, and there doesn't need to be any condition because the applicant already will know that the variance has been denied. And secondly, now they can work within that parameter, that 200 square feet. But what I would add, if the board were to approve that, if the board were to approve that variance for the structure in the front yard, the applicant would still need to comply with township requirements regarding the placement, planting type, and size of 10 proposed trees to the satisfaction of the board engineer. The applicant, since the applicant himself is proposing rain barrels, and the applicant has stipulated on the record that the applicant will provide a, help me out here, our board engineer, a HydroCAD model. Is that what it is?
Stormwater calculation.
A stormwater calculation, thank you, to prove that the rain barrels will contain the rainwater. That's also to the satisfaction of our board engineer. And the applicant has already stipulated on the record that any lighting that will be placed on that building potentially will be down shielded and will comply with township standards and with the building code. So if someone were to make that motion would be to grant the C variance for the location in the front yard, deny the variance for the additional 720 square feet, and overall to approve this without the 720 square feet with the conditions that I have just stated on record.
Can I get said motion?
If there is another motion that someone would like to make, feel free. Those same conditions will still apply.
I'll just tell you what I'm struggling with. If we anticipate that there are variances, and we're talking about 725 square feet, but the 2,000 is allowed.
Yes.
In a 12-acre lot, in any size lot, but any lot big enough that meets that ratio. What is it? I mean, what's the point of a variance? That's just what I mean, we're talking about writing things out of regulation.
That's exactly what.
Denying it for 725
We're allowing
feet,
it
which
to
I
be
know
built,
we
we're allowing it
disagree
to be
whether
built
it's.
in the front yard, but we're not allowing the additional
The
square
additional
footage.
700 square feet, which is the exterior rooftop structure supported by poles. Another motion that can be made is this application. Someone can make a motion approving the entire application, the both C variances that have been requested. It's another option.
Marty, to answer your question, if you start just routinely granting variances, what's the purpose of the zoning ordinances?
Yeah, no, I am not saying routinely. I totally understand that. I definitely understand that. It just seems to me, and I think we just disagree with each other about this. It seems to me that 700 square feet is a small difference.
It's 36%.
Right,
Sure,
but it's
that's
also a
small.
12-acre lot. I know, we just disagree, that's all.
No, but I mean, I'm just pointing out that Where does it stop?
Well, I think if he came in and said, I want 1,000 foot, I mean, he came in and said, I want a 3,000 foot building, we said no. So there's, you know,
So,
there-
but then if he knocks 280 square feet off, so it's 2,720, that's okay?
I mean,
That's
I
too
think-
subjective. I mean, there's no more rules.
okay, well, I said, we disagree.
There's just no more rules.
I was just expressing what was giving me pause, the reason I wasn't saying so moved. I'm not completely opposed to it, I just feel like we should get it out there.
The drafters of the ordinance could have tied the size of the structure to the size of the lot, and they did. But on the downside, if the lot is too small, you have to go less than 2,000 square feet. And in other districts, they did cap it at less than
If it
2,000.
was a 200 square foot awning, would we grant the variance or absolutely no increase over 2,000?
I'll address that if and when it comes before
Well,
us.
that's the
I don't
exact
need
same
to,
thing that
I
I'm
don't
saying.
need to ski that slope to the bottom.
Okay.
I mean, then you could say if it's 1 square foot over, would we grant
Right,
it?
exactly.
Um,
So
Well-
you and I just have a different idea of what that slope is. For me, 700 doesn't seem as large. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
But if you then say on all of our numerical limitations, 36% isn't a big deal, and we can grant variances for 36% over any
I
of our
think there are
numerical
more,
caps.
there are more factors than just in relation to the building. There's also just lot size.
Right, but this is a 12-acre lot. That's not a big lot in East Stalwell.
Well, okay. I'm done.
I mean, when you look at it, we have 18,288 acres in East Stalwell and 4,000 people. We have 4.5 acres per person.
I think we both understand each other's positions. I don't think we need any more words at 5 of 10.
Okay. Look, to move this process along, I'll make the motion along the lines of what Tim described, as articulated in legalese by your law firm.
To approve the first location variance, but not the size.
Correct.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Roll call.
Mike Mills,
Yes.
Natalie Nelson,
Yes.
Jackson Ryder,
Yes.
Marnie Stetson,
Yes.
Rick Wolf,
Yes.
Mark Castellano,
Yes.
and Tim Willie.
Yes.
See, Marty, we don't disagree.
I think we should talk about things.
I agree with you. I think the debate is healthy.
So we're going to,
We're gonna draft a resolution, effectively approval, because this was approved, for next month.
Okay. Can you send a copy to the meeting? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Charlie, are you gonna leave that for me, or are you gonna email me? Is that what we have?
Either way.
You can leave it and I'll just, okay.
You want the board to do it?
You can take the board if you like it.
It doesn't matter.
You can leave it.
we're going to take a 5-minute recess.
We have recess?
Yes. 5 minutes.
Hold on. Yeah. So it's 10 o'clock. Is that our time limit? Are we going?
No new application.
Oh, okay.
No new.
Perfect. Thank
I think
you.
we can get through this relatively quickly. Next on the agenda is.
Just in time.
Master plan re-exam, land use plan element proposal from Hired Rule Associates.
Do you want to do a roll call? A roll call? Roll
We want
call.
to do a roll call after we took a break.
I'll make sure they're still here.
Yeah.
Make sure
Mhm.
everybody's
Here.
here. We can do that.
Mhm.
You have such little.
Mark Castellano,
Here.
Afraid people left.
Gregory Siakio.
Yep.
Mike Mills.
Here.
Natalie Nelson.
Here.
Jackson Ryder.
Here.
Tamara Lee.
Yes.
Marnie Stetson.
Here.
Rick Wolf.
I'm here.
Tim Willie.
Here.
Elena, Yolanta, Bill.
Sorry, I have some boards who do it after every pause and every break, and I just thought of it, sorry.
So, so the master plan re-exam proposal, I assume everybody's had time to look it over.
There's been 3 of them.
Yes, yes, the most recent one. Hopefully it's on the top of my file.
I think they're in order.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So, the proposal is for total of what, 12 plus?
Well, first can I ask, which proposal are we looking at? The March, the April, or the May one?
The May one, because that's the scope of services for the preparation of master plan re-exam report for the township.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, but it would be my preference to look at the April one. I mean, it seems like we have 3 different ones. You know, we can maybe
Okay.
choose which one. I would prefer we look at the April one.
Okay.
I don't know what everybody else thinks. But
No,
let me just
start there.
I'll just explain why.
Yeah, go for it.
A couple of reasons. One, the April one is more complete. We will get, more, we will be able to look at more of our planning policies and update more planning policies. Now, I understand that the April one is the bigger proposal, and there might not be, we might not have enough funding for the entire thing. I'll turn to Rick and to Mark because I don't know what the status of the budget is, but the last thing I was told is that the planning board has about $20,000 this year between municipal money and the grant from the county to talk about planning. I don't know if that's still accurate, gentlemen.
That, I believe, Tim, is still accurate.
Okay, and then I was also told that we're likely to have another 20,000 next year. So if that's the circumstance. And then the other thing I'm weighing into this is I have now had 3 conversations with the county where they have asked me to please reassure them that we are going to spend that grant money before the end of the year because they can't guarantee that they can carry it over. So the April proposal is the only one that really lets us spend that county money. So my suggestion to the board would be that we approve task number 3. So task number 1 is the re-exam. Task number 2 is looking at the ABAD zone. Task number 3 is looking at Ringo's and the highway. And task number 4 is meetings. My suggestion would be that we let Elena do Ringo's and the highway so that we can use that grant money from the county and get that work done. And we'll do that part of the master plan. And maybe save the rest of her April proposal for next year when we get more money. That would be my suggestion. I think we get to make sure we don't lose that grant money and still get our
That's
planning
great.
done. So that would be my suggestion.
We don't want to be writing the county a check for
I haven't compared April to May, but I did have a conversation with Elena where we talked about a pretty comprehensive master plan, which was going to include, and Elena can articulate this better than I can, but she was going to review and update a number of our zoning ordinances that quite frankly are a mess. And I thought that was a good idea. And I said to her that we would do the best that we could to try to get money in the budget next year to do that because it really needs to be done. So I'm not adverse to what Tam is saying, but I would suggest that maybe Elena, you want to articulate this better than I can.
Yes,
that we layer that in.
Sure, yeah. So I had suggested, I know that the funding was tight for this year. And And I had initially suggested was how we could do a master plan re-exam this year using the funding, which would essentially set it up to then do a full comprehensive land use element for the township next year. However, again, this does not solve the issue of using up those specific county funds. But I suggested doing a comprehensive land use element, looking at all the existing zones in the township, taking a look through the ordinance, determining what's working, what isn't working, similar to how I break out the scope here in my April 5th proposal letter, except it would also include the Sourland Mountain Zone too, you know, as a comprehensive whole, and then from there see, you know, make the recommendations on where you want to see your land use kind of go for the next 10, 15 years, and use that kind of as your guiding document in the future. And then, you know, the master plan reexamination report would essentially kind of set the township up to do the land use plan element at a later date. If that
So I
makes
think
any
we're talking
sense.
about a combination of the April and May letters.
Well, except I think if we analyze the Ringos, the highway, and the ABAD and figure out what our planning policies are, we're going to be in a better position to look at the ordinances and see what changes need to be made. I mean, if we
I
don't-
agree with that.
Right, it would be like taking a part of that land use element and doing it now for these specific zones.
So that would be
But are we
done
gonna- are we
by,
gonna- am I making-
Use the money.
Are we gonna use the money?
Right, so that's right, yeah, right,
that would be done.
That's what I'm,
So
It's
that,
all gonna get done over the next 2 years, but are we gonna use the money and not lose the money? That's.
so the,
I think the only way we don't lose the money is if we do task 3,
Right,
the April.
that's the only thing that's really applicable, right?
Right.
Four.
And that
That's
fits into the
that's
budget
the only one.
pretty much.
We'd be crazy not to.
Would that be
You don't
done
wanna-
with,
Tim
like,
said
this
you
year
don't
with the
wanna have money back.
re-exam?
That's
Right.
nuts.
Right.
right?
And the
Well,
county doesn't want
in
the
a way.
money back.
No,
So task 3 is
Hopefully they wanna give
making
us
the money
more.
off the
Correct.
re-exam this year too.
We'll see,
if
but
we spend it well enough, maybe they'll
There's
give us
20
more.
this year, that's 18.
So are we gonna bring this up for a vote? Is this an item to be voted on, that we're gonna approve this spending,
Or is it consensus?
Is it
No,
just
I
a
think
consensus?
we have to vote on
You-
it.
you
So
should.
But
Yeah.
I
Anything
would-
dealing with money, you should vote.
I would make a motion that we approve task 3 of Elena's April proposal.
Can I get a second?
I second.
Roll call.
Mark,
Yes.
Mike Mills,
yes.
Natalie Nelson,
Yes.
Tamara Lee,
Yes.
Marnie Stetson,
Yes.
Rick Wolf,
Yes.
Tim Willie.
Yes.
1, 2, 3.
So we're on agreement that we're gonna move forward with the Ringos project now, get this money used up, and then next year, hopefully the funding's gonna be there, and we can proceed with the rest of a good re-exam, a thorough re-exam.
Yeah, and I would think that by October, November, we should have a sense as to whether the money's gonna be there next year. By then, we'll have a better sense of what we can do with this, what I loosely call CARES grant money that the federal government will be giving us. And whether that'll free up anything in the budget that could be moved into this. So we should know by October, November, what we could do next year, but for the time being, I agree, let's use the
So
grant money.
Elena, what do you need from us? You're just gonna get started and just keep in touch? with
Yeah,
us,
I'll
or we're
start
gonna-
doing some of the existing conditions. I believe in my scope. Yes, I do have an existing conditions report. That, yes, GIS maps and lot size analysis for those zones. So yeah, I will put together just a conditions report, and once that's done, I guess I will touch base with the board and either present it at a meeting or so have you. I did want to ask about, though, in the, I'm gonna jump months now, in the May proposal letter, we did provide a budget to do some general public outreach meetings. I didn't know what the extent of public outreach the board was looking for. I kind of put in like an a la carte number per public outreach meeting. I mean, we can determine that at a later date.
Well,
Actually, I have
That's
some.
gonna lead into our next.
our
discussion.
Okay.
Next discussion.
Okay.
But-
I
but
jumped the
before
gun.
we-
Stand by.
But before we get to that, while we're on your proposal, Elena, if you, because the timeline, because we have a timeline and we at least want to get through this task 3 or close to the end, by the end of the year, can you just make the next meeting, give some thought to progress so that we know what to expect in a couple months, you know, for the rest of the year, so we can make sure we're on target.
Sure.
Not
You know,
just
what you're
spend
gonna do.
faster.
Right, right.
Sure.
But with respect to outreach, yeah, I did want, while Elena's working on that, we, the planning board as a team, could be doing some of the outreach that we talked about, reaching out to this, you know, all the different farmers, small, medium, and large, to equine farmers, to farm owners, and to people who live around farms and whatnot. I haven't spoken to everybody on the board, but I've spoken to several people. I've got at least 6 people who have said that they'd be willing to help with these outreach meetings. That includes Tim, Marnie, Mike, Natalie, Angelo, and myself. Others might, you know, be willing to do that too. Like I said, I haven't talked to everybody. What I would suggest is those who are willing to help with these outreach meetings, maybe we could have a work session where we could talk about how we're going to schedule these. Yeah, at one point I threw out maybe, you know, 2 or 3 of us at most would go to each meeting. There's a whole lot of logistics to these things, and I think a work session is a good place to talk that out. And then only the people who want to participate in those outreach meetings really needs to come. These would be public. It would be open to the public. It would be up to our discretion, depending on how the meeting goes, whether or not we
So
want
work
to
sessions.
take comment. Because you want to correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't have to take public comment at a work session meeting. But yes, you do have to have them open so that the public can at least observe what you're doing. Yes.
So they have to be noticed. We have to
They have to
follow
be
all that-
noticed.
all that
We
stuff,
cannot
right?
make any decisions.
Yeah.
We'll talk about stuff. We'll come up with a strategy for the outreach meetings, and then we'll bring it back to a regular meeting and report on it.
Okay.
And then the public can comment.
Pam, can you just clarify what these outreach meetings are for?
Well, there's, we haven't got, there's segments of the community that haven't really spoken about, in fact, they may not even know. They may not be familiar with what we're doing. So we want to
Is
get
this
their
for the
opinions.
farm project? Or
This is,
what's
well, now we're talking about master plan.
master plan? Okay,
We're talking about master
Okay.
plan, and we're talking about revisiting the planning policies within the master plan
okay,
as it pertains to farming.
okay,
And we want to talk to everybody in the community about that.
okay. I just wanted it clarified because some people don't know what, it's not
Yeah.
specific, so.
Yeah, well, this is a master plan project, which is one of the initiatives in the farm project, but we're now working
Okay.
on master plan, which is why it's a planning board initiative.
Okay. Thank you.
So if that's okay with everybody, I mean, I'm welcome to, does anybody have any other ideas, thoughts, reactions to that? Does that seem like a reasonable way to work it?
Look, having gone through 2 campaigns and having been the mayor now for 2.5 years, one thing I've learned about this town is there's a small percentage of the residents who will actually come and talk to you about things. But if you really want to get a sense of what the majority of the residents think, you have to go to them. They're not going to come to you. So I think the outreach is a good idea. It's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of time. It's the only way that you're going to get a sense of what the residents want. You're not going to get it by just saying we're having a public hearing and come. Those kinds of meetings, you attract a small group of people. Quite often, they're not representative of all of the residents. That's not how you're going to find out. So I think it's a great idea, and it's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Newbury said yes to help me out with the meetings. So- I've got it right. Okay, then what I would suggest is between now and the next meeting, I will talk to more planning board members and those who have want to be part of these outreach meetings. I'll try to get a sense of what's the best way to do it and when,
And
Work
when,
on the
well,
logistics.
when we should have the work session. And then we'll talk about the work session at next meeting. We'll agree on a date and then you can notice for it. Okay? All right, I will do it.
So that kind of took care of my discussion on the farm project. That's what-
Well, there's one other thing, no, the outreach has to do with the master plan. Yes, but there's one other thing on the farm project I just want to report. One of the initiatives of the farm project was to create a farm stand map, an interactive web-based farm stand map. Like everything, it has grown to be bigger than just what we initially thought it was going to be. We are now going to have an web-based interactive map of all the farms that want to be on this map. Not just farms with farm stands, but grain farms, livestock farms, equine farms, all of them. Program has been written and it's been sent out. It's being tested right now. We got 10 volunteers plus Allison Castellano and myself. She and I are testing it. We created fake farms and our data will be thrown away, but we wanted to see how the program worked. But Mike Mills, Jared Weeks, Tracy Oliver, Jamie Bowers, Paula Mann, David Wolin, Joe Heckman, Ann Del Campo, Christian Miravito, and Jim Brophy are all helping us test this. So it's a nice range, small, medium, and large, grain, vegetables, livestock, equine, old, young.
I didn't
computer literate,
hear
not.
any lawyer-owned farms in that way.
That's right. So they're all testing it right now. We found a couple of bugs. We'll fix those, but we're getting real close to having something that's going to go live.
And then the big question is how do you incentivize people to actually fill it out and be accurate with the information you're putting into it? It's gonna be hard.
Yeah. Yeah. That's next. That's it. That's the part.
Great, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Dan. Oral reports, Mike.
Nothing for possible. Again.
Marty.
Nothing this month. Tune in next month.
Okay.
Quorum now.
Ms. Parsons.
September, I just want to bring up that I'm not available for the meeting. Your other option is to have our deputy clerk cover, but she's not tech savvy, so it's either if you want to delay it, postpone it, go with a fill-in.
Well, can we hire somebody to come in and handle the tech, like,
Who?
well, Matt Miller maybe? I mean, can we give him whatever per hour and have him come in and handle the technology?
Where are we gonna pay him from?
Well, I thought we had some money put aside for times when you're out to pay somebody to fill in
No.
for you.
No,
So the meeting's scheduled for the 8th of September right now, correct?
yes.
You just push it back a week.
Well, why don't we see if we could find somebody who will volunteer? to
Okay,
handle
well,
the
we just want to stay on top of it and not get too close.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up because
That's why we
it's
wanted to
advanced,
bring
I'm
it
not
up
gonna
now.
be
It's
here
hard to
and
reschedule.
no one's gonna be able to
They're
cover
scheduled.
with
It's hard to find an
efficiently.
alternate date.
Yeah.
I mean, we have residents who've been willing to volunteer in the past. I mean, Matt may even come in and do it without being
But you-
paid.
It's not really just the audio, it's someone who's gonna be able to run the meeting and do the whole procedures. So it's not just,
Well, you also can do the procedures. And then, you know, the minutes, and Tim's a pro now. I mean, he has this down. He doesn't even need a script.
you know, the minutes I can do when I,
And the minutes you could do,
No, Crystal will make my script up before she leaves town.
trust me, I get the same script for the township committee meetings, so I hear you. But
Tim just wanted me to raise
No, I just wanted
it,
to
see
bring it
what
up
your
to everybody's
thoughts were.
attention. So everybody think about, what if we pushed it back a week to the 15th? We can discuss this next meeting. In the meantime, we can look into if somebody can do the fill-in for it and run it. I don't think Pam's up to it, and that's, you know, but I wouldn't get near that thing.
And the other secretaries are too new to
Yeah.
cover.
Throw it to the
I'm
wolves.
flexible on dates. I'm working from home, so.
So is this room open on the 15th?
I'll look, but I have to check.
So let's.
Why don't you tell us next month what dates?
Sure, I'll check tomorrow and I'll email.
Let's
Well, we
shoot- let's
can't make
shoot
a
for
decision.
I know, but at least you guys can check your
We can check
calendar.
our calendars. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Let's shoot for the 15th, just for.
As a rain date.
Yeah, just for all intents and purposes. If something else works out, then we'll roll with that. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, Krista just said she could check what dates the room is available
Yeah.
and let us know.
Because there's only two people using the this room so far. It's the township committee and us, so most likely.
The Board of Health.
They're still Zoom.
Oh,
Can I get a motion to approve the vouchers?
So, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any discussions, questions? Can I get a motion to open, we didn't have to do a roll call on it, did we? Can I get a motion to open to the public?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The public,
I just, I'll talk again. Rita Ralph, on Ledell Road. I really enjoyed this meeting tonight, except I'm getting sleepy. And I was, I had hoped you would open it up before you voted on the variance, because I was very much in agreement. Well, I just sort of ignored the 400 barrel stuff, but as an anecdote, I live on One Ledell Road, and I'm surrounded by 400 acres of preserved farmland and 5 neighbors, and now a 10-acre flag lot's coming behind me. So you're really far away from me, and he is having to spend $30,000 for detention bases, so runoff from his gutters don't flood the vineyard and possibly me and a few neighbors, and so, I think the environmental impact of in the mountains is really, the fact that rain comes down in gutters, and even if they don't overflow the gutter, the storms, they're gonna overflow, and they're gonna be concentrated where they land. It's not the same as water coming down, landing on 2,000 square feet. And this particular neighbor is building a 2,000 square foot house with 3 bedrooms and a 2-car attached garage. I haven't seen it because it's 800 feet from me, but I know they told me what they had to spend for the detention basin. And so, it's really serious, more serious in the mountain than anywhere else. That 10 acres is grass, but he's gonna grow some fruit trees to get his farmland assessment. So, we do have to look at why, and you guys are doing a good job of considering how unique the mountains are. And so we'll congratulate you on that.
thank you. Francis?
Francis Gavin, it's still 123 Worthville Road. I know the property of which you're speaking. And you are fortunately in the Valley District and not in the mountains. I am somewhat concerned about all the back and forth and planning and things that are going on behind the scenes. Multiple conversations with by independent various people on the board. That will be a problem with the transparency on this outreach and whatever is going on. I'd like to be on the record that I want to know when and where, and I'm assuming your workshop meetings are going to be here because I will be filming them. And if you're having conversations and things like that with the county, free or this or that or the other, I hope you're keeping notes and that those are collected, organized, or shared with the record, because there's too much stuff that goes on the soft side of things. And there's a lot of people, the farmers are not here because they're finishing up getting their fields planted for the rain tomorrow, but they are participating by probably some of them on Zoom or something from the front end of their tractor. But hey, it's got air conditioning too. Be very careful about what you do in unofficial capacities or informal or interactions. There's a fine line between dealing with the public and acting and sort of pre-work, work things. Because, you know, people are watching and they're good people who want to do the right thing. And Marnie, I appreciate your questions and your willingness to have an opinion. And Tim for running a good meeting and things like that. But it's, yeah, you're spending, what is the amount of money that is in the April versus the May proposal?
The April proposal, I mean, Elena, I believe the total was 39,000, but we only approved task 3.
And task 3 was how
which was
much?
18,500.
That's the 18.5 that's for the village and the highway zone and all of that
That's using
stuff.
up the grant.
That's
grant
grant
money we
money.
got from the county. Yes, that's why we're starting that, because there's a timeline to that. Francis.
Are you doing anything about where you want to be with the marijuana depot? You know, August is coming closer.
That's in the township committee's hands. That's not in our hands.
Okay, so there's no,
It's on the agenda tomorrow, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah, Francis, there's a
On the agenda for tomorrow.
open session for the public tomorrow.
okay. No, I don't smoke and I don't toke. I just pay attention. You know, so we'll be staying tuned and paying attention. And I'll be filing some OPA requests for documentation and records and copies of videotapes.
Sure.
So,
Thank you, Francis.
yeah.
Anybody on Zoom?
Yeah, I know what you mean, but it's funny.
No.
Nobody on Zoom? Can I get a motion to close to the public, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Correspondence. The New Jersey planner, the Tabby's Place expansion, Borough Flemington public notice. Everybody can pay attention to that, I'm sure. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I'm opposed. I want to stay in.
It's good night.
All right.